The Lost Bookstores, A Glimpse of Post-World War I America. Written by Guido Bruno. Narrated by Greene. To my mind, there is nothing so beautiful or so provocative as a second-hand bookstore. To me, it is astonishing and miraculous to think that any one of us can poke among the stalls for something to read overnight, and that this something may be the sum of a lifetime of sweat, tears, and genius that some poor, struggling, blessed fellow expended trying to teach us the truth. Lionel Barrymore. Introduction. I love bookstores. I love them too much. For the past decade, given that I have more free time since much of my teaching career in college has gone online, even pre-COVID-19, I spend almost every day hunting for yet another book, or two, or three, or sometimes 10. Today we live in the golden age of book collecting since a large swath of people have switched to digital mediums, from iPhones to Kindles to iPads to audiobooks to podcasts, and are donating their books to various libraries and vintage bookstores across the country. Used books have gotten downright cheap to buy, and some libraries, like the two I most frequently visit, Huntington Beach and Newport Beach, are oftentimes swamped with inventory. I love searching for forgotten tomes, hidden gems that were published prior to 1924, which automatically puts them into the public domain. I have been very lucky in this regard, sometimes finding buried treasure where I least expect it. For instance, one day after surfing, I decided to visit the small library on Main Street in Huntington Beach, which offers only a few used books, and usually not a very good collection. But on this magical day I came upon a first edition of the famous occult novel, Brother of the Third Degree, which was first published in the latter part of the 19th century. Although I was familiar with the title, I had never read the book. It was a delicious surprise, since it is a fascinating, theosophically tinged tale that reminds one of Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, but with a more believable plot line. However, as much as I love bookstores and libraries, I realize too keenly that we are witnessing the end of an era. Yes, we are still reading, perhaps more than we even realize, given our constant browsing on our smartphones and computers, but our need for bounded books has lessened, and going to bookstores is becoming a ritual for a smaller and smaller number, especially since there are so few left. Just as record stores have more or less disappeared with the exception of some vintage vinyl alternative shops, bookstores are on the brink of extinction. Perhaps not entirely, our nostalgia for them is still too strong, but where there was once a relative abundance of places that sold books, today we see fewer and fewer. Even the big chain bookstore, Barnes & Noble, appears destined for extinction. Of course, I hope I am wrong, but I fear that I am not. In any case, it is precisely for this very reason that I was so happy to find Guido Bruno's classic 1922 tome, Adventures in American Bookshops. Here he describes what bookstores were like during the post-World War I boom in such cities as New York, Chicago, Boston, and elsewhere. He speaks of a time when very young entrepreneurs saw opening a bookstore as an investment into the future, where the public was eager not only to read the latest novels, but also to enjoy the experience of browsing shelves upon shelves of new literary possibilities. In this edition, we have selected key sections of Bruno's writings that concentrate on bookstores, what they had to offer, and what kinds of experiences one had during this most interesting time period. Almost all of the bookstores he mentions are long gone, but their memories persist, and one hopes that these lost bookstores will not be forgotten forever. Perhaps, even if only in virtual or augmented reality, we can resurrect these wonderful places anew and remember what a beautiful opportunity they presented for us in this strange world we inhabit. David Christopher Lane, Ph.D., Professor of Philosophy, Mount San Antonio College. Incurable Bibliomaniac. In New York bookshops. Every city has its book streets. Bookshops are gregarious, and they grow like mushrooms in groups. There is little competition in the book business. No matter how large and complete the stock of a second-hand book dealer may be, his neighbor's collection will be quite different. The clients of second-hand bookshops like to browse about. They seldom ask for a certain book, and they love to have a large territory in which to hunt. The location of book streets changes with the growth of a city. 75 years ago, the book center of New York was far downtown on Ann Street. After the Astor Library had opened its doors, 4th Avenue became the city center and soon was lined with picturesque bookshops. The city grew, and 23rd Street became the Dorado of the book hunter. Then people began to make immense fortunes and build palaces and mansions on 5th Avenue. Central Park was open to the public, and 59th Street became the book street of New York. Ever further, the city expanded. Harlem grew in population, and 125th Street is another shopping center for lovers of books and objects of art. Most of the book dealers kept step with the times. They moved from street to street. The grandfather had been prominent on Ann Street, the son on 4th Avenue, and the grandson flourishes on 125th. 4th Avenue has come to honors again during the past 4 years. Some big book dealers had the idea to move back to Old Booksellers Row. New people soon gathered around them, and today most of the second-hand book business of the United States is transacted here on this old street, surrounded by a ramshackle neighborhood, invaded by factory buildings and sweatshops. But some book dealers could never make up their minds to move. They stuck to their shops. They are the landmarks of New York's book streets. The Den of a Pessimist. The Nestor of the book dealers who have remained and have withstood the trend of the times is E.A. Custer on 59th Street, right near Park Avenue, next to a livery stable in the cellar of an old-fashioned brownstone house, is his picturesque shop. Large bookstalls with hundreds of books invite you to rummage about. Quaint paintings and drawings will arrest your attention and make you stop even if you are in a hurry. Firearms of all descriptions, swords and shining armor, add a war touch that seems quite appropriate in our time. If you look closer, you see a pale face with keen black eyes behind the show window. You have to look very closely in order to detect it. And if you enter the store, you will meet the proprietor of Face and Store, sitting at his lookout, watching his stalls, scrutinizing the passers-by who stop to glance at his wares. He continues in his position while he is talking to you. He never takes his eyes from his treasures, even while waiting on a customer, or delving into the depths of his shop. "I have to watch my property," he offers as explanation while excusing himself. "I am listening to what you say," he adds. "Don't mind if I don't look at you while we talk. All people who stop out there to look at my books are thieves, and if I give them a chance to get away with my books, they prefer to acquire them that way rather than to buy. They steal from earliest childhood and never cease until they are dead. I have been 40 years in this very place, and I know what I am talking about. And though I am as watchful as a dog, I lose about 20% of the stock that I put in my stalls through thieving. All book collectors are thieves. People who never would think of taking anything else without paying for it must think a bookshop is different from all other stores. Their consciences are not sin-stricken if they incidentally slip a book they like into their pocket and walk out with it. I have long ceased to read books. I read human nature for my pastime. There is not a day that I do not lose books by theft. Take, for instance, last week. I had a set of Dickens on my stands, a cheap edition on the table where I keep books for boys. I saw a little freckled, red-haired, barefooted lad inspecting the Dickens books for longer than half an hour. Some time later he came back and looked at them again. This time he had a few books under his arm. He laid his books on the table and managed very cleverly to pick them up after a while, together with one of my Dickens books. The boy really wanted to read the book, and I let him get away with it. I knew that he was passing my shop every day, and I thought of speaking to him another time. The next day he came again, inspected the remaining volumes of my Dickens set for a few minutes, repeated his trick of the day before, and stole another volume. He came every day and acquired 6 of the 7 volumes. It was only on Saturday that he stole the 6th volume. This time I went after him, told him sternly to come back with me, handed him the 7th volume, and said to him, "Here, my boy, I don't keep open on Sunday, and somebody might buy this one and spoil your set. Better take it along. You have the right spirit. Continue, and one of these days you will find yourself a millionaire. Perhaps then you will endow libraries." Or the old Irish woman whom I caught only yesterday. She came with a basket covered with newspapers, examined my books very carefully, and dropped every once in a while one of the books in her basket. I waited until the basket was filled. Then I told her to come inside of my shop. I emptied the basket and handed it back to her. I didn't say a word. She took her basket and went outside. Well-to-do-looking men come in, examine books, tear out plates, and walk out again without buying a penny's worth of my stock. I don't think they are all bad at heart. They simply don't look at books as merchandise, and if they can get something for nothing, they take it. Women are the worst, especially those modern women who write and try to reform humanity. They are quite shameless and do anything as long as there is a slight chance of getting away with it. But, I interjected, mustn't it be dreadful to sit in your shop day after day as a sort of watchman? "I'm accustomed to it," he answered, "and that's the only way I can make my business pay. It was not always so. There was a time when people really loved books and bought them in order to read. Then they had time to read. The successful man of today has an automobile, has to go out joyriding after business hours, has to spend his time in cabarets and roadhouses. He needs books only as decorations when he buys a home or furnishes an apartment, and then he leaves it usually to his decorator to choose the most attractive and expensive bindings in keeping with the color scheme of his library. I tell you, New Yorkers don't know books, don't want to know them. The men read newspapers, the women magazines, and the young people trashy novels. Of course, there are our modern book collectors. They know as much about the commercial values of books as I do. They buy books as an investment, just like pictures. They follow the auction sales and gamble in books. You can hardly call such people book lovers. 30 years ago, I used to have comfortable chairs in my shop, and in the evening big businessmen, lawyers, and physicians would drop in and examine at leisure some tomes that I had laid before them, because I knew they were interested in this or that subject. Today, most of the men who are interested in books are so poor that they can hardly pay their room rent. And then he proceeded to show me some of his treasures. Who do you think buys this sort of books in our day? Dealers. Nobody but dealers. And they sell them again to dealers. Finally, they find their way into the auction rooms and are bought again by a dealer. Mr. Custer has traveled all over Europe and is a lover of beautiful paintings. Original Corot's, Millet's original drawings by Aubrey Beardsley lean against piles of books, hang in cobweb corners. Are you not afraid that someone will steal them? I asked him, commenting on his carelessness. They don't know enough, was his answer. Some months ago I had a wonderful painting of Corot's in the show window. A man whom I knew as a notorious miser came in and asked if it was genuine. I said in a matter-of-fact way that I have no proof but the picture, and that I would sell it for $125. I myself had paid for it $3,000. He looked at it for a long time and then said he would come in again. The following day he brought his wife and brother-in-law to look at it. They examined it very carefully and went out. The following week I sent the painting to an auction sale where it realized $8,800, notwithstanding the bad times on account of the war. On the very day that I received my check in payment for the picture, the man came in again and proposed to buy it for $100. I showed him the check, and it pleases me even today to think how disappointed and crestfallen he was, because I never told him that I would not have sold him the picture, even if he had given me $125 at the time I offered it to him. I have my worries, but I also have a lot of enjoyment watching my contemporaries and noting their faults. Mr. Custer is a small man with a kindly smile and after I saw him chatting with the ragamuffins swarming around his bookstalls, and talking kindly to a girl who wanted some information, his piercing dark eyes did not seem so very misogynic, and his pessimism seemed of the kind of the dog who barks but does not bite. A Whitman enthusiast. Little Max Breslow, who isn't taller than a good-sized doll and has such tiny hands that he can hardly hold 2 books at the same time, is so vivacious and young-looking that everybody must like him if for no other reason than his continuous smile. He is the last of his guild on 23rd Street. Max sold books since his earliest youth. He sold his school books. When a boy, he used to go about picking up books and selling them to book dealers. He started in as apprentice in an out-of-the-way bookshop on 8th Avenue, and then opened up the cellar which he has made so attractive since. As neighbors, he had the potentates of the second-hand book market, Mr. Schulte and Mr. Stammer, both of whom have moved to 4th Avenue since, and many other less important sellers of books who have dispersed in all directions during these latter years. He loves 23rd Street, and intends to stick there till the last house is transformed into a factory. You almost fall into his shop from the street, so steep are the stairs and tread-worn. He has the instinct of the born second-hand book dealer to find out-of-the-way books on out-of-the-way subjects. There is always something unusual in his shop, and his prizes are within the reach of the poor man's purse. He likes his books, and he likes to sell them to good homes, and therefore he often fits his price to the purchaser's purse. His hobby is Walt Whitman. He has the most famous collection of Whitman items in this country, even larger and more extensive than the one Horace Traubel has guarded. He has original manuscripts of Whitman, proof sheets of his books, everything that was ever written in any language about Walt Whitman, more than 400 pictures of the good gray poet, and you couldn't buy one of those precious things for any money in the world. An optimist. Frank Bender, who is considered at present one of the leading second-hand book dealers of 4th Avenue, and that means of the United States, is an entirely self-made man, and his career is unique even among book dealers. Only 5 years ago he started his shop without books, without money, and without knowledge. In a short time he acquired all these 3 essentials, and here is his own story. I used to sell books to architects on the road, architectural yearbooks and magazines, and later I added books on decorations which I sold to decorators. It occurred to me one day that I could save rent if I opened a shop where I could sell enough books of all kinds to pay expenses. That was 5 years ago. I signed a lease for a little one-story building that stood where the new post office on 4th Avenue and 13th Street is at present. I sold enough architectural books to pay my first month's rent and to buy lumber to fix up my shop. I literally built up my own business. I laid the floors, built the shelves, the tables. My shelves remained empty because I had no money to buy books. One day a friendly print dealer came along who must have taken interest in and pity on me. "Why don't you hang some prints around your shop to fill out the wall spaces?" he asked. "It will make it look better. I have a bunch of prints I will sell you for $40, and I'll give you 6 months' time in which to pay it." I accepted his offer, and those prints netted me over $500 in a surprisingly short time. If one keeps a bookshop, something unusual happens almost every day. It is the uncertainty of the book business that always attracts me. Of course, every book dealer who wants to make a decent living must have a specialty of his own. Mine is architectural books. I have a large clientele of architects and decorators. I know these books well, and they were the backbone of my business. Chance and good luck are the great factors in the book dealer's life. Let me tell you a few instances. A few months after I opened my shop at the time of the big auction sales, I felt very gloomy. Of course, I needed cash in order to buy books, and I did not have it. One morning, one of my best customers walked into my shop and asked for a copy of Canina's Ancient Rome. I told him that the book was so scarce that there was no use to ask for it. "Well," he said, I am willing to give you $250 for it any time you bring me a copy." The very same afternoon, I noticed a copy of the book in an auction catalog to be sold the next day. I went to the auction and sat there shaking like a leaf, waiting for the first bid after the book was put up. Nobody seemed to be interested to buy it. Somebody bid $5, and I got it, finally, for $6.75. I had it wrapped up, took it around the corner to my customer, and collected $250. That was the first real money I made, and it gave me a chance to acquire better books. Take only yesterday. I was very busy writing when a man who introduced himself as a rag paper dealer offered me linen-bound copies of a historical encyclopedia for 7.5 cents a volume. I didn't even want to spend time talking to him, so I declined abruptly. "I have many thousands of these books," the man insisted. "Make me an offer." He went out and, strange to say, came back in a half hour with a cartload of the books and said to me, "Here they are." The books proved good sellers, and I made a pile of money. The people that come into my shop are my only source of information. They all tell me what they know about the books they are interested in. I love to talk to them, even if they seem to be cranks. No, I don't mistrust them. They are welcome to make themselves at home in my place. I believe that everybody that enters my shop is just as honest and straight as I am myself. Only once, after I had lost a valuable book in a mysterious way, I became suspicious. I was busy talking to some customers as a man entered whose looks I did not like. He busied himself with some fashion books at the back of my store. I grew so nervous about him that I approached him quite roughly with a question, "What is it you are looking for?" He answered, as I thought guiltily, naming the title of a certain fashion book that I happened to have in stock. I brought it out, he examined it, and asked the price. It was $7.50. The book had cost me $5. He said that he could not pay $7.50 for the book. If he really wants to buy the book, I thought, and didn't come in here to steal, he will purchase it for $3.50. I firmly believed that the man did not have 10 cents in his pocket. I offered the book for $3.50. "At this price I take it," he answered. I lost $1.50, but regained my belief in humanity. A gambler. On 34th, near Lexington Avenue, Jerome Duke has opened a bookshop of a peculiar sort. It is not exactly a bookshop because there are antiques and curiosities all over the place. The books are thrown together topsy-turvy. Latin authors, modern novelists, theological books, old French tomes, and German philosophers. I asked the proprietor about his books, and his answer was, "I don't know anything about them. I never read books and would not be bothered with them. I buy them at a certain price, and I try to sell them at a profit. In fact, I intend to buy anything I can get cheap enough, no matter what it is. I went into the book game in order to gamble, and I am going to gamble on anything that people bring in here. There is one thing I have just refused to buy because the man wanted too much for it. He said that he had recently returned from Europe, had been a soldier, and wanted to sell me the embalmed finger of a German general. I forget the name of the general, but the man said that it was authentic and that he would sign a document before a notary public swearing that he had been present at the time the finger was cut off of the general's hand. Now, if he had asked 50 cents or $1, I would have been willing to take a chance because it would make a good window display in this time of war. But he wanted $5, and I couldn't see my way clear. That's too much of a chance to stake a 5 spot on an embalmed finger of a German general. So I bought a slipper instead. It belonged to a Madame Jumel, and she is supposed to have worn it on the day that she got her divorce from Aaron Burr. I paid $1 for it, and I consider it a pretty sound gamble. How so? I asked. Well, he answered, because Aaron Burr was the second vice president of the United States. Of course, that argument was final, and I wished him luck with his purchase. 2. Strange to say, most of the bookshops in New York with individual appeal are modern places only recently established, and their proprietors young, often very young people. Most of them are up-to-date businessmen who had their training in different lines. They were lovers of books. They realized the possibilities of a bookshop with a soul. They opened shops after their own hearts and are meeting with success. The Oxford Bookshop. Alfred Goldsmith's is the youngest of New York's bookshops. This is to be found on Lexington Avenue near 25th Street, in an old-fashioned basement with pillars and nooks, near some of the oldest auction rooms in the city. Just the place for a bookshop. Shelves all around the walls filled with a few thousand well-selected books, comfortable chairs to sit in here and there, a sacred case of first editions, all other books well dusted and in neat rows, modern authors mostly, scarce translations of authors whose names, perhaps, you have never heard before, but who will be your good friends when once you have made their acquaintance. Mr. Goldsmith is a young man, a college graduate with a successful business career in the print paper industry behind him. He always was a great reader and buyer of books. One day this fall he decided to open a bookshop and to get married. He did both, and is well satisfied with both ventures. Book collectors are gifted with a sixth sense. It is not necessary to send them announcements. Some day they are sure to drift in, and if the atmosphere is congenial, they come again and again. "I love books," said Mr. Goldsmith, who is a great philosopher and an excellent talker. "Book selling is a game. The sort of books I am selling are hard to be found and quite easy to sell. My great pleasure is to go about town picking up my books. Once I place them for sale on my shelves, they quickly go. It is wonderfully interesting to observe the people that come in here to buy books. Of course, you know all about the peculiarities of collectors, but since I have opened my shop, I have discovered some new species of bookshop habitués. Let me tell you about them. There is Mr. Pimple, a big, stout, uncouth man of about 30, who looks like a butcher and pretends to be a highly educated lover of books. His specialty is the autograph game. He writes letters to living authors which read something like this: "In a treasured niche of my favorite bookshelf in my library is a volume that I prize more than any other book. It is your novel. You would earn the eternal gratitude of an old bookworm if you would have the goodness to autograph it for me." The author receives the letter and imagines some old devoted book crank, autographs the copy, and returns it to Mr. Pimple at his, the author's, own expense. Mr. Pimple makes the rounds of the book dealers and sells his treasured autograph copy to the highest bidder. Worse than that, he throws the very letter which he received from the author, promising the book, into the bargain. Gertrude Atherton, Richard Le Gallienne, Katie Douglas Wiggins, and many others have autographed whole sets, 40 and 50 books at one time, for Mr. Pimple, who went so far as to take advance orders for such sets. How little he really thinks of the authors to whom he sends his stock admiration letter the following story evidences. One day he asked me if 8 books of Upton Sinclair, first editions, would bring good money if autographed by the author. I answered in the affirmative. Pimple looked up the address of Sinclair, wrote him, received a favorable reply, and found that it would cost 40 cents to send the books by parcel post to Pasadena, California. "Too much money," he remarked. He tore out the fly-leaves, sent them on. Mr. Sinclair autographed them. Pimple pasted them carefully back into the books and sold the whole set on the very day. But the best trick was the one he put over on the publishers of Ambrose Bierce. After Bierce's disappearance, collectors were hot after his first editions and autographs. Bierce's publishers had a good many letters and presented one to each purchaser of the author's collected works. Mr. Pimple paid them a visit, talked for more than an hour of his admiration for Bierce, mentioned once or twice that circumstances did not permit him to purchase one of the sets, and finally declared that the ambition of his life was to own a letter in the handwriting of the greatest writer and artist in the world. The sincere enthusiasm of Pimple, his insistence the pleading of poverty, finally induced the publisher to give him a short letter of Ambrose Bierce as a gift. I will never part with this treasure. I will always carry it in my portfolio near my heart, were his parting words. He came directly to my shop and told me the story. We were talking about Bierce as a customer entered and soon took a hand in the conversation. I'd like to get a letter of Bierce, he explained. I would be willing to pay $7.50 for a short note in his hand. I hardly believed my eyes. Mr. Pimple took out his portfolio from near his heart and offered his treasured letter of Bierce for the $7.50. This man is known to every rare book dealer in the city, and he isn't the only one of his clan. He is tolerated because he produces inscribed copies of authors that are hard to get. Then there are the habitual book thieves, whom I love to watch. I once had an occasion to do a friendly turn to one of these gentlemen, who are on our blacklist. He calls himself Van Southall, and in an outburst of gratitude he made the following confession. I like you, Goldsmith. You don't need to be afraid of me. I'd never take anything in your shop. It is quite different with other dealers. Why shouldn't I take advantage of them? If I can slip something in my pocket, it is my own business and their lookout. But you can feel quite safe. I know that you are an ambitious young man who loves books, and I should never harm you. Mr. Goldsmith reads a great deal, books as well as human nature. He rarely makes a mistake in suggesting books to his clients. He likes people who write books. He likes their personality. And no author can find a better apostle than Mr. Goldsmith, provided he is congenial. If you wish to know what authors Mr. Goldsmith does not like, look at his 10-cent stand in front of the shop. Extraordinary values can be had there for $1, because Mr. Goldsmith does not like the books. Washington Square Bookshop. Just a while before the time when certain people got the ambition to own a tea shop in Greenwich Village, the very same people thought it the aim of their lives to be the proprietors of bookshops in the vicinity of Washington Square. Still more ambitious were they. They wanted to print their own books. The Bonai brothers, now Bonai and Liveright, started their Glebe magazine there and published pretty little books by all sorts of authors. Cranborg here printed his booklets, and many others, whose fame was too short-lived to be recorded, half a dozen of them. One sold out to the other, and finally, Egmont Ahrens purchased whatever there was left from pretty René Lacoste. His became the bookshop of the neighborhood. Ahrens is a born publisher, a litterateur himself, a connoisseur of good books, and an excellent businessman to boot. So he became the first successful businessman in Greenwich Village. His shop is crowded with intellectuals from the whole town. He invites geniuses, as well as buyers of books. His series of plays, there are 7 of them published to date, are the first plays of men who are making their way in the great theatrical world, and who gave life for a time to the little theater movement in New York. Ahrens is a good businessman, as I said before, and so he recently purchased a printing plant and is printing his own books. His Whitman book is the best on the market, and his next publication shows his daring spirit. To publish a verbatim translation of Arthur Schnitzler's famous Reigen is surely a courageous undertaking in our times of comstockery, Sumnerism, and superprudery. These 10 dialogues caused a considerable stir throughout the civilized world. They were translated into every language, including Japanese, but excluding English. No English or American publisher cared to give these exquisite silhouettes of real life to the reading public. Some months ago, a young writer who is known for his imbroglios with the vice censor, from which he invariably emerged as victor, gave a private reading of the plays before an invited audience. Ahrens was there and at once decided to undertake the publication. The publisher ought to be a bookseller and should spend most of his time in his bookshop. That is the only way to feel the pulse of the reading public, is Mr. Ahrens's motto. It isn't a bad maxim for a modern American publisher. A German bookseller. High upon Lexington Avenue, near 57th Street, is the bookshop of Mr. E. Weihe. His specialties are books on art, rare prints, etchings, and books on laces. I am a German, said Mr. Valle. I can't do anything about it. I simply have to make the best of it in these times of war. I always have been a bookseller. I was an apprentice to a bookseller in Germany, and I learned the trade in the old German way. I worked from 6 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night for 3 long years. I loved to travel, and was employed in shops in Germany, Italy, and finally I settled in London. There I opened a shop. Unfortunately for me, the war broke out. I had to close up, and the next best thing to do was to come over here. The British government most courteously gave me permit to leave, and I will never forget the kind words of the policeman who took me to the steamer. I hope you will soon come back and not stay in America. Mr. Valle caters to moneyed collectors exclusively, people who buy books on laces for $250, or a history of Sir Joshua Reynolds' work for $350, people who want rare things and to whom money is no object. He is a friend of the artist and writer who are welcome in his shop, to whom he lends books on chance acquaintance, because he believes in human honesty and has unbounded faith in his fellow men. People trust me. Why shouldn't I trust them? Was his simple remark. It seems quite wonderful to think that Mr. Valle came to America 4 years ago as a refugee and without funds, and owns today a choice stock of the rarest books, the confidence of his clients, and credit wherever he desires it. Mr. Gerhardt's Den. Opposite the library on 42nd Street, high up in a medium-sized skyscraper, is Mr. Gerhardt's Den. Christian Gerhardt is a specialist in out-of-the-way books by out-of-the-way authors. He issues catalogs every month, and these catalogs are indexes of curiosities of literature. Pamphlets by well-known authors, perhaps their first literary products, books by fanatics, and by poets whose songs were never known by the world. Individualistic magazines of whose existence you have never heard fill long rows of his bookshelves. But whenever I think of Mr. Gerhardt, I remember that unhappy singer of our East Side, of Zoe Anderson, who called herself the Queen of Bohemia, who founded the Ragged Edge Club, and presided for years at its unique sessions in the Old Maria. Miss Anderson struggled for years with printers, paper dealers, and news companies in order to give us her little magazine, The East Side, a fearless freelance sheet in which she attacked everyone and everything. The champion of the outcasts and sweatshop workers of the East Side, living among them, writing about them with greater understanding than any contemporary writer, poor Zoe ended her own life as cheerfully as she had lived after telling all about it in the then current and last issue of her magazine. Zoe Anderson had been a well-known newspaper woman on the staffs of many metropolitan papers, including the New York Times. Gerhardt was her lieutenant, the moving spirit of her Ragged Edge Club, master of ceremonies of the jolly dinners she used to give, and master of ceremonies at her funeral, where they carried out her last wishes. The same band that had played merry dances for her while alive played the same merry dances during the burial ceremonies. The East Side is mournful enough. I have always tried to make them happy. Let them be merry to the tune of gay music while they are burying me, were her own directions. Gerhardt became her literary executor, and her few books, together with bound copies of her magazine, always occupy a place of honor in his den. 1918. 3. 42nd Street loses its brilliance on 7th Avenue and shows all the way down to the West Side ferries the sad degeneration of a New York street that was once a fashionable residence section. Glaring electric signs from 5th to 7th Avenues. High life after dusk. 18 theaters. Cabarets galore. The amusement center of the metropolis around Broadway. The seat of learning in one whole block on 5th Avenue. The moment you cross 7th Avenue, cheap rooming houses, tenement dwellings, sweatshops. Wealth and poverty rub elbows. Puritanical decency on the borders of the city's mire. Lunchrooms, garages, plumber shops, dirty Jewish and Italian groceries, loan brokers' offices, Everywhere signs, rooms to let. Gaudily dressed women emerge from dark house entrances, on whose stoops laborers read their evening papers. Children everywhere, ragged, uncared-for children. In the midst of this typically American panorama, pinched in between a repair shop and a restaurant, is Mr. Lawson's bookstore. He sells books, too, but I would rather call his place of business an intellectual exchange. "How can you sell books in this neighborhood?" I asked of Mr. Lawson on my first visit to his shop. I knew him a dozen of years ago in Chicago. He's a bookman of the old school. He knows books, is well-read, well-known among the members of his guild. Americana had been his specialty, and many a scarce and rare item had he discovered in days gone by. "What a strange place you have selected here in New York." "Stick around for a couple of hours and you will see yourself that bookstores of my brand are actually needed in this sort of neighborhood in New York," was his offhand answer, while he continued counting green and yellow tickets, assorting them by their colors. "What are they?" I asked. "Coupons," was the answer. "All these people in my neighborhood insist on getting coupons with all their purchases. So-called profit-sharing coupons. They get them with their cigars, with their soap, with their butter, with most of their victuals. Each of these coupons represents a certain cash value. Here in this catalog," and he showed me a voluminous book with many pictures, "you can see what they can exchange for their coupons, if they choose to save enough of them. Here lies the point. They never save enough of these coupons. Most of my customers live from hand to mouth. Often they are in actual need of 10 or 15 cents. I buy their coupons. At other times, again, they come down here to buy coupons in order to complete the needed number of the slips and to exchange them for some household article, but mostly for gifts. You would be surprised how they like cheap bric-a-brac, phony jewelry, and most of all, cut glass. Imitation cut glass, of course. Most of my business is done after 6 o'clock in the evening. See the music rolls over there? A player piano concern established some time ago a branch in this section and got rid of hundreds of instruments. And whenever the people need money, they bring me their music rolls. I pay a few cents for them, but that's just what they need. They sell them on Thursday and Friday. On Saturday, after they receive their paychecks, they buy new ones. It is a part of their life's routine." An old woman came in with a bunch of magazines. Mr. Lawson bought them for a few cents. "She keeps a rooming house," he explained. "Her roomers are cheap comedians who never stay longer than a couple of days or so and always leave magazines when they move. She sells them. She also sends her roomers down to me to buy magazines if they get lonely in the evening and inquire for something to read. You see that man?" And he pointed to an old fellow who was examining carefully a big heap of magazines. "He's the news dealer from the corner. He runs in several times a day and buys lots of magazines. The American News Company grants him the return privilege on certain magazines for 30 days and others for 60 days. He buys any standard magazine of the current week here for a nickel, some even cheaper, and then he returns them to the news company at full value. For instance, he buys a 20-cent magazine for a nickel, and the American News Company credits him with 15 cents upon its return. There is nothing on earth that you cannot sell in this neighborhood, and on the other hand, you would be constantly surprised what people will offer you for sale." The store was crowded. Boys wanted detective stories, women dreamed books, foreigners dictionaries. Somebody was trying records on an old phonograph in the back of the store. A woman who still showed traces of great beauty wanted to get rid of hundreds of photographs of herself, showing her an exotic stage costume. But how about these oil paintings? There were some magnificent pictures in one corner and really good books right next to trashy novels. "That's the other side of my book business," answered Lawson. "Dealers come in from all parts of the country, and I have the whole day to myself to attend auctions, to visit collectors. A good many gems have drifted in here. Doesn't it look like a junk shop? And I dare to say that very few dealers in New York have such valuable books, autographs, prints, paintings, and etchings as I have at times right here among all this junk." A procession of strange people continued to pour in. Everybody bought something, sold or exchanged something. Half a dozen languages were talked simultaneously, and the cash register rang merrily through the noise and constant chatter. "There must be lots of money in this novel game of yours?" I asked of Lawson. "Of course there is," he answered cheerfully. "The individual purchases are small, but judge for yourself how many people are coming in, and then don't forget that every one of them is a steady customer, coming down here almost every other day, buying or selling, but I am always the winner. And I dare say that these people would miss me. I provide for them amusement, pleasure, and even education. And do they not come to me in their need?" Casement's Book Emporium. Bookstores, like mushrooms, never grow solitary. Only a few doors south is another bookstore, nothing but books and magazines. Mr. Casement is the proprietor. Somebody told me once that Mr. Casement is a second cousin of Sir Roger Casement, but Mr. Casement denied any relationship with the great Irish patriot. He could not deny, however, his Irish origin. I sell magazines mostly to my neighbors here, detective stories to the boys, and Mead's books to the girls, but the dealers from all over town come here and pick out whatever they want. All his books are alphabetically arranged, and I don't wonder that many a scarce book can be found amongst his stock. Mr. Casement is a solitary figure among the book dealers of New York, very silent, always kindly, smiling, obliging, and unassuming. Often in the twilight, when he drinks his cup of coffee and eats his herring with rye bread, I love to drop in and watch his self-content and real satisfaction with his life and with his lot. He is the only happy man among all the book dealers in New York, from hope and fear set free, content among his books. The Madison Bookstore. The only uptown bookshop that keeps open in the evening. The visitors here are quite different from those on 42nd Street, but I guess they are as lonesome and often as helpless as the people who come to Mr. Lawson's shop. There are the strangers from the big hostelries on Fifth Avenue, the girls from the studio club, and a good many physicians from the nearby clinical buildings. Mr. Alexander A. Salop is the master of the mansion, a young man, studious-looking, perhaps because he wears eyeglasses. A shrewd businessman, but books are not only merchandise to him. He reads much in several languages, has his likes and dislikes in literature, and keeps always a great variety of modern German and French books. A little room in the back of his shop is consecrated to the bookworms. A few comfortable chairs, reading lamps, library tables. It looks very homey and too inviting to simply buy and go. Peter Stammer, who calls himself the original New York book hunter, and who knows the book if it was ever printed anywhere and at any time in this world, comes here often in the evening to pick up books, but mostly to chat, to swap experiences. Mr. Stammer ought to write his memoirs for the benefit of contemporary literature. Here are a few interesting bits gleaned from him several days ago. "Did you ever know," he asked, "that Henry James had a sister? She must have been a literary woman of great ability. About 40 years ago I was a typesetter in an English town. I remember the most curious job I ever had to do was a book by Miss James. It was a sort of autobiography, most extraordinary. A big book of several hundred pages, very intimate and outspoken. Only 3 copies were to be printed. The type was destroyed, and even the proof pages had to be returned. I wonder whatever happened to that book. I wish I could have made a copy of its contents. I set up the first edition of Oscar Wilde's Ballad of Reading Gaol. That was in Boston while I worked for Benjamin Tucker." You would naturally think that a book printed in many millions of copies could never become scarce. I thought so too, until I ran across a poem by Bret Harte, his Excelsior. I didn't find the poem among his collected works. Bret Harte collectors didn't seem to know of its existence. I started inquiries to investigate, and I found that this poem had been written as an advertisement for a well-known soap, had been printed in millions of copies, distributed free of charge all over America. Curious enough, my copy was the only existing one outside one in the files of the soap concern. Mr. Stammer knows books and people so well, has met so many writers, he really ought to retire from business for a year and write his reminiscences. 4. Book dealers and dressmakers are very much alike. Both supply us with things most necessary in daily life and with its useless luxuries. If you are rich, you walk into an exclusive dressmaking establishment on Fifth Avenue. You tell the dressmaker, "I want to look slender. I like such and such a color. I want long skirts or short skirts." You ask for an evening gown, or for a street dress, or for an afternoon gown. And if you are rich and wish to buy books, you'll go next door to the exclusive bookshop. You will tell the salesman, "I want a novel or a biography, something serious or something humorous. I don't want it too free." The salesman will size you up and will bring forth the books which you will wish to take with you. At your next visit, dressmaker as well as book dealer will have your size and your number, and you will not have to repeat your special desires. If you are only a well-to-do man or woman with a regular salary or income, you have your charge accounts in department stores and medium-class shops, in bookstores on Booksellers' Row, as Fourth Avenue between 11th and 14th Street was so justly christened, or perhaps in one of the many bookshops on 59th Street. The merchants here will not pay so very much attention to your wishes and to your tastes, but try to impress you with the sanctity of the merciless goddess Vogue. The salesman doesn't care that you detest ruffles and fringes. They are in season, and therefore you ought to wear them, or you are a back number, and he treats you with contempt. The department store book salesman will tell you that Robert Chambers' last novel is the best seller, and if you tell him that Chambers doesn't write to your taste, he will simply pity you and tell you that everybody is reading it, and that is final. But if you are poor, or your circumstances permit you to expend only a certain amount of money for your clothes and for your books, and you despise the department store atmosphere with its alluring bargains that persecute you ever after you were weak enough to buy them, like spooks of murdered souls, then adventures galore are in store for you, especially if you live in New York, because one day surely you will run across that marvelous dressmaker who charges only a couple of dollars a day, follows your ideas, creates dreams of garments, and makes dressing a pleasure for you. And in the strangest parts of the city, like a geranium pot on the sill of a tenement house, you encounter once in a while a real bookstore in New York. Is not the discovery an event in our unromantic lives? Looking over the dust-covered treasures is an exploration into strange lands, and usually a talk with the proprietor himself charms us, like the fairy tale of long-forgotten childhood. 2nd Avenue around First Street is the promenade of that part of the Bowery which has not yet been turned into factories and sweatshops. Here are delicatessen stores, second-hand furniture dealers, grocery shops, ice cream parlors, drug stores, moving picture theaters, with crudely painted advertising boards depicting scenes from Blood and Thunder dramas. Then there is Kettle's Theater, where they play Shakespeare in Yiddish. Thousands of men and women people the sidewalks and street. Romanian, Hungarian, German, and Polish with a Jewish accent are spoken here, and Yiddish, of course, the guttural sounds of which give the ear the same sensation as the eye receives from the window display of the foreign-looking pickles, fancily prepared onions, and enormous strangely shaped sausages of the stores. The women are without headgear, in underskirts, with blankets or shawls around their shoulders, their shoes unbuttoned. They have run out to buy something. Everybody on this street seems to buy or sell, talking loudly, bargaining with a passion inherited through generations. On the corner of 2nd Avenue and First Street is the Municipal Court, with its crowds of lawyers, of fighting, screaming, and excited men and women on the doorsteps. In New York bookshops continued. Mr. Kirschenbaum's shop. Who in this beehive has time or desire to view the bookstalls in front of Mr. Kirschenbaum's bookstore? Why did he select this extraordinary location for his shop? A tall, heavy-set, broad-shouldered Pole, with blond whiskers, blue eyes, and an expression of kindness on his face that doesn't seem to correspond with the muscles of his arms, of which no prize-fighter need be ashamed. And if you walk into his shop, you'll find almost any time between 8 a.m. and midnight, men and women there like yourself, from all parts of the city, buying all sorts of books, as recently on a Saturday afternoon when a young girl asked for a copy of Thomas à Kempis and an old man for a copy of Oscar Wilde's fairy tales. He has a little bit of everything in his shop, but you have to take the trouble of looking through it in order to discover the gems you are looking for. Here is Mr. Kirschenbaum's story in a few words. I served 12 years in a Polish regiment of the Austrian army as a non-commissioned officer. Later on, I was an agent of officers and of the nobility in Galicia. There was nothing that I wouldn't buy of them or that I wouldn't sell to them. If they needed money, I got it for them. One day I decided to emigrate to this country. When I arrived here, I got a pushcart, went through the streets of New York, bought up everything people had no use for, and then I sold it in the Bowery from my cart. They called me the Siegel Cooper of the East Side. Soon I specialized in books. I didn't know books and their value, and I sold them as I am selling them today, as merchandise. I buy them for a certain price, and I sell them at a certain profit, and I don't care how much they are really worth. I haven't got time to look real values up. I'm too busy selling in quantities. One of my sons knows books. He opened a shop on 4th Avenue, but I'm satisfied to turn over my stock as quickly as I can. I always had known big people in the old country, and some of them I met here in influential positions. I had a hard time during my first years in America, and they offered me great positions in some branches of business that they knew I was an expert in, but the first demand they made was to shear off my beard. I knew what they meant. I looked too Jewish to them. My beard was never touched by a razor, and never will be as long as I live, and my insisting upon the preservation of the exterior of an Orthodox Jew made me impossible in any leading position of a business organization. So you see, I had to start an independent business. That's how I happen to be here. Mr. Kirschenbaum's shelves and tables contain something of everything in all languages about all subjects. To spend a couple of hours in his shop will prove that there is nothing new and original in this world that has not been written about by somebody years and years ago. A specialist in excitement. If you think that the sensational paper novel, the mystery story in installments printed on newspaper, the dearly beloved Nick Carter stories, are things of the past because you don't see them in the regulation bookstores where intellectuals meet, you are mistaken. They are as widely read as ever, and Mr. Joe W. Noak specializes in these delights of certain old ladies, of boys and young girls. His little store on 3rd Avenue between 9th and 10th Streets is filled up with the most gruesome experiences in crime and adventure. I have been here for 12 years, he said recently. One could hardly hear his words, so great was the noise of the elevated thundering on its structure and the heavy delivery wagons rumbling over the old-fashioned cobblestones. I know my customers well. Some are reading detective stories exclusively. They don't want anything but detective stories. The younger generation prefers old magazines with short stories to paper novels. I buy them by the pound from rag dealers, from the Salvation Army, and everywhere I can get them. People pay as much as 5 cents for such back numbers. Once upon a time, lots of Irish people used to live in this neighborhood, and many Irish ladies still come to my shop to buy the works of Charles Garvice and of Bertha M. Clay. These are clean, good love stories. After they are through, they bring them back, and I allow them a few pennies on their next purchase, but in a few months they ask for the same books again, and some of my customers read every year the same books over and over. Then there are the shop girls from nearby department stores. They buy Street and Smith paper novels. The thicker the book, the quicker they take it. They tell each other about the most exciting of these love stories, and they, too, read the same books constantly. Over there, and he pointed to a whole shelf full of mysterious-looking pamphlets and books, are my dream books, books on palmistry and on fortune-telling. Old ladies buy them. There are just as many dream books as cookbooks, and each of these ladies sticks to the same brand for almost a lifetime. Often they bring in old torn, finger-marked copies in which the printing can hardly be distinguished, and they wish to get another copy of the very same book. Perhaps it hasn't been printed for the last 30 or 40 years, and you should see their disappointment if I tell them so, and how suspiciously they eye other dream books before they decide to buy one. Young girls also often are purchasers of dream books and books on palmistry. They use them for entertainment at parties and take them along on picnics. One old gentleman comes along every once in a while early in the morning, buys a magazine for a nickel, and then spends a considerable length of time before my dream book shelf. I always wonder if he is looking up his last night's dream. Once I suggested to him to buy a copy, but he got indignant, because he didn't believe in such superstitious humbug. The Man Who Knows His Books. A spotlessly clean little store on 38th Street near 6th Avenue, bookshelves all around the walls, friendly pictures right beneath the ceiling. In the middle of the room a little desk, and in a chair before it Mr. Corbett, who prides himself on having read every book that he ever sold. Jack London used to spend hours here whenever he was in New York, and Edwin Markham received a good deal of inspiration from Mr. Corbett's suggestions. Literary hack writers are his daily visitors. To call them customers would be too optimistic. He dreams of magazine articles, he invents titles for them, and he sells you for a few pennies all the material to write them, if you happen to be a journalist on the lookout for suggestions. He has his own peculiar ideas of what people should read and what they shouldn't read, and it is not an unusual occurrence that, for instance, a young girl should enter his shop and ask for a certain book, and he would answer, "Yes, I have it, but you shouldn't read it, and I won't sell it to you." And then he will tell her about some other book, and picture it in such desirable colors that she will change her mind and buy it instead. "You know," he told me once, "the bookseller has a very important mission in life. The writer writes his books, but he doesn't know into whose hands they will fall. The publisher sells them as merchandise to dealers all over the country, but we little shopkeepers come in contact with the real readers. It's up to us to place something in their hands that might be decisive for their future career, that might inspire them to great and noble thoughts, and that might make criminals out of them. A few pennies that we might gain might mean the perdition of lives and souls." The Farmer Bookseller. Mr. D.L. Haberson is now on Saturdays only in his little bookstore that seems so lonesome and solitary on 23rd Street near 8th Avenue, in the midst of cheap rooming houses and the noise of the subway excavations and constructions that are going on day and night. After years of toil, he has arrived at the goal of his ambition. He has bought a farm on Long Island, one of those small farms on which one has to be an artist in order to make both ends meet. But he was in the book business for such a long time that almost nothing seems impossible to him, and he used to display many curious books in his shop. Especially out-of-the-way magazines, edited by out-of-the-way people, were his hobby. A small man, pale and slender, with the eyes of a philosopher, what strange desire must have taken possession of him to wish to till the soil? He installed an assistant in his shop, surely not a lucrative job, but this man told me, "I like it here. I can read all day, and can save the money that I used to spend for books." That's the stuff most of those little book dealers are made of. They don't aspire to commercial success. If they make a living and can read constantly, that's their reward in life. A Night Bird. On Columbus Avenue, between 67th and 68th Streets, near Healy's Cabaret, a window is lighted no matter at what time in the night you may pass by. If you look into the narrow shop, you will see a man sitting in a very small space, surrounded by heaps of books, smoking a long cigar, reading. His store remains closed in the daytime, and I don't imagine that the people who spend their nights in Mr. Healy's Cabaret buy books before they go home, or to some other place, but he doesn't seem to mind, and is perfectly happy with his books, which grow all around him, and make the space in which he can move freely smaller from day to day. He sits there all night and reads his books and is delighted to discover some long-forgotten writer, to point out his charms to you, and doesn't even ask you to buy. And there is Mr. Lawson, somewhere far west on 42nd Street, who travels about the country picking up old books in farmhouses, and Mr. Schwartz, who used to be a waiter and who started a bookshop near Astor Place. He wanted to cater to the discriminating readers of the Spices of Life, but Mr. Sumner interfered with his intentions, and twice he made the unpleasant acquaintance of the Society for the Suppression of Vice. He had to pay a fine and do something more painful than that. And now, if a prospective customer asks for one of the proscribed books, he shudders piously, brings out an old edition of Shakespeare, and recommends the English Bard as a suitable substitute for some French writer. Jim Gillen, who had threatened for the past 8 years to sell out his bookshop on the corner of 28th Street and Lexington Avenue, has done it finally, and moved out to his place somewhere in Jersey in order to breed rabbits, the study and the dream of his life. He had delved in books for so many years that nobody would have supposed he would ever change his profession. Then there is Old Man Johnson, who prints catalogs every once in a while and sends them out broadcast from his basement store on 28th Street near Broadway, and who is constantly and mysteriously busy at his desk, day and night, writing in a big folio. Perhaps he is writing the adventures and tribulations of a New York book dealer. Mr. Stammer, their great patron. Do you ask, how do all these people manage to earn a livelihood? Mr. Stammer, the great book dealer from 4th Avenue, whose specialty is hunting up every book that anybody in the United States might desire, no matter when and where printed, and who knows the most obscure book dealer in the most obscure part of New York, answered this question because 2/3 of the book dealers in New York are selling exclusively, almost, to the remaining third. The big book dealers very rarely buy books from private sources. These little bookshops are our vanguards that collect the honey for us, and we come and take whatever we can use, or they bring it to us, and we are glad to have them come regularly. Mr. Stammer makes his round to these small book dealers almost constantly every day. He is their educator and patron. He tells them what books are worth money, and he pays a good price whenever he can use them. He is a welcome figure on rent day, and most of the treasures of these cobwebbed corners wander to the comfortable shelves of his palace on 4th Avenue. Dealers in literary property. Letters of celebrated men and women, dead and alive, can today be purchased in the open market. The more private they are, and the more they incorporate of the writer's soul, the higher the price. There is no atmosphere of romance in these transactions. The autograph dealers sell because they wish to make money. The purchasers buy because they desire to possess something unique and because they know that the letters and autographs of celebrities are an excellent investment. Let us put aside untimely sentiment and assume that it is perfectly proper to sell at auction Shelley's love letters, or that a letter of Poe's grocer, demanding in rude terms immediate payment of $2.50 for food supplied, is a fitting library ornament if expensively framed, together with the poet's portrait. And let us visit a few of the important dealers in such literary property in New York. Mr. Benjamin's office is situated on the 3rd floor of the Brunswick building facing Madison Square. This building occupies the site of the old Brunswick Hotel, once famous as New York's resting place for the literati who visited the United States. The walls of this place of business are lined with enormous safes. A solitary typewriter clicks solemnly. The dignity of a broker's office prevails, such dignity as obtains where deeds are executed involving the transfer of millions. Behind an enormous table, Mr. Benjamin is seated. Nothing here reminds one of an antiquarian's cabinet or of a collector's museum. It is the working table of a bank president, whose chief motto is efficiency. No, there is mighty little romance in this business, Mr. Benjamin began, and there seemed no reason to doubt his statement. I purchase autographs, manuscripts, signed portraits, and all kinds of literary property in order to sell again. There is an art in buying and a greater art in selling. It requires knowledge and a certain instinct or ability to associate events and people so that the value of the materials increases while in my possession. I deal exclusively in gilt-edged autographs of those men who have made history, literature, and music. Our great statesmen are my specialty. No museum or library in the world has at present more authentic original material relating to our War of Independence and the Civil War than you can see in these safes of mine. Framed portraits with short letters by men of note are the sidelines of book and art dealers. You cannot find them here. I am the only exclusive dealer in autographs in the United States. I have been 30 years at the game, and I have made $250,000. Oh, yes, I have about twice that amount invested in autographs. How does one become a dealer in literary property? How does one buy and sell? Were my next questions. I can tell you how I did it, but as for the others, I would refuse to guarantee results, unlike the detective correspondence schools. I did not want to be a dealer in autographs as a young man, but about 40-odd years ago I had dreams that someday my own autographs would be valuable, or that at least I should be able to sell some of them to publishers and editors. My father, Park Benjamin, had been a literary man and a poet of note. He successfully edited big daily papers in New York. I graduated from Union College, served my apprenticeship on country magazines, and was at the age of 19 editor of the Schenectady Daily Union. I made good and went to New York. I worked for 11 years as reporter for The Sun, several years directly under the great Dana. Interviews with big men were my specialty, and someday I shall write my reminiscences, which will, I think, make interesting reading. I inherited the poetical vein from my father. A book of my poems appears this month. In the bookstore of my brother, who sold once in a while an autograph of a celebrity, I met several collectors and studied their hobbies. I saw wide possibilities in the field if the business were handled scientifically, and I devoted myself to it exclusively. In September 1887, I started a monthly paper, The Collector, and I have published it ever since. It reaches not only my customers and people to whom I might be able to sell, but librarians and historians as well. And it is largely quoted in biographies, as I reprint unique letters and documents which otherwise would not be accessible to the public. So you see, I am an editor, and my paper is the oldest trade paper in the United States, if you can call it a trade to sell literary property. An autograph collector graduates from the ranks of book collectors. He usually begins by buying letters of his favorite authors to insert in their works or to frame with their portraits. Bit by bit, he becomes a regular collector. He finds that autograph letters take up little space compared with books, and that they are far less liable to injury by worms or decay. A well-selected collection of autographs will nearly always prove profitable at an auction sale. The sale draws in wealthy buyers whom the dealers never reach, and their competition ensures high prices. Genuine autograph collecting has nothing to do with autograph fiends and their collecting of signatures. A large collection of signatures, well arranged and illustrated with portraits and clippings, is a good thing. But albums of miscellaneous signatures with no system and begged from annoyed celebrities are little better than trash. When I buy such a collection, I break it up at once. Notes responding to requests for autographs are no better than signatures. They are out of place in a good collection. A letter should contain some of the original thought of the writer and, if possible, refer to incidents of his life or to his writings. My regular customers, people who buy constantly whenever I have something to offer them in their special line, are not the movie millionaires you can meet in the art shops and bookshops on Fifth Avenue. They are usually retired businessmen and physicians, well-to-do or of moderate means, university professors who have to save in order to be able to buy autographs. Every one of them has made a study of some literary or political celebrity, or is interested in some period of our own history. All documents or letters needed to complete their collections are welcome. But I also count among my patrons of long standing poor men whose only property in this world are their collections of autographs, and they actually often suffer privations rather than part with their treasures. Some people are greatly interested in minor literary men of bygone days, whose autographs were never thought worth saving. I have a search department for such cases, and I am often curiously successful. You would be surprised to find how almost anything you may want can be found if you do not tire in looking for it, and if you know how and where to advertise. I advertise everywhere and constantly. The smallest country paper sometimes means more to my business than the big city paper. I have bought many trunks of valuable documents and letters in the garrets of old homesteads in towns whose names you have never heard of, called there by some heir, who read my advertisement in the paper, and who preferred to sell the literary remains of his grandfather to me, rather than to the ragman. And here is the secret of success in this business: constant and wise advertising. Of course, the autographs of our best writers are in constant demand. They have a market price, a price, however, which fluctuates almost from day to day. For instance, if a man dies, his value goes up instantly, if his fame has not been an overnight popularity. On the other hand, the signature of the favorite actress will lose all value at her death, and will be forgotten by the public as well as by the autograph dealer. On the very day that James Whitcomb Riley was prostrated by a paralytic stroke, and it became known that he would never be able to use his right hand again, the prices of his manuscripts and letters almost doubled. Living English authors like Kipling or Wells or Chesterton fetch higher prices here than in England. Kipling especially brings almost 5 times as much here as he does in his own country. Of course, we buy at auctions. The Anderson galleries are noted in New York for their sales, and so is the American Art Association. Both appeal to the collector rather than to the dealer, and prices are often prohibitive. Values are being created there, and it very often happens that some collector pays $500 for something that he refused to pay $50 for to the dealer. One of the hobbies of American collectors is a page with the unbroken lines of all the signatories to the Declaration of Independence. Another favorite object is the signatures of the Presidents of the United States. I pay a good deal of attention to the latter, having collected them myself. Do you want to hear my opinion of the handwritings of our various presidents, and some natural conclusions reached as to their character? Most of them wrote a good clear hand. At 17 years of age, Washington wrote a clear round hand, upright with a tendency to ornamentation of the capital letters. In 1760, he wrote a smooth running hand, and during the War of the Revolution, this changed to the large, beautiful round hand, the finest specimen of writing of which I have any knowledge. This persisted to his death. John Adams wrote an up-and-down round hand, rather small, early in life, and gradually growing larger until the individual letters were bigger than those made by any other president. At the end, when his sight failed, his writing became an irregular scrawl, on and off the line. Thomas Jefferson started with a fluent running hand, and this characteristic his signature retained throughout his life. Shortly before the Revolution, his hand changed to a round, upright form, and so continued. James Monroe wrote a very running hand, crowding his letters together and often going off the line. He fancied a heavy writing pen. John Quincy Adams wrote a plain perpendicular hand with no ornamentation, almost a backhand. In late years it showed much trembling in the letters, but remained clear. James Buchanan wrote a round running hand, sometimes large and sometimes small, with each letter well formed. His writing continued the same all his life. Abraham Lincoln wrote at first a plain running hand with letters well made and words well spaced. As years passed, it became more upright until at the end it was straight up and down. Ulysses S. Grant wrote an unformed schoolboy hand when he left West Point. This improved and became firm, but was never a good hand. Of late years it was a running hand, with letters incomplete and other marks of haste. On the whole, one of the poorest hands of the lot. James A. Garfield wrote a handsome running hand when a general in the army. The letters were well formed and the words well separated. Altogether a fine clerkly hand. Later it became irregular and tended towards the upright, and lost its beauty. Grover Cleveland began with a large angular running hand and gradually changed to a small ladylike hand of great regularity. At first it was like Madison's. William McKinley wrote a fine plain running hand with letters well formed and a tendency not to lift the pen between words. Theodore Roosevelt has written the worst hand of any of the presidents. The letters are badly formed, the lines in poor alignment, and altogether they have a very scratchy appearance. They bear marks of haste, of a mind outrunning the pen. William H. Taft has a fine, handsome, regular, large running hand, altogether a handsome letter. Woodrow Wilson writes a very handsome hand, with letters well made, freely running in straight lines, altogether of the copperplate order. His letters seem to be written with deliberation and care. Washington and Polk wrote the handsomest letters, and Roosevelt and Grant the scratchiest. Mr. Benjamin is the great pioneer in his chosen field, the prince of the autograph dealers. The money he makes in autographs he invests in real estate. He owns a magnificent summer home, and all because he knows how to buy and how to sell letters of dead and living celebrities. The market price of some autographs. S. L. Clemens, $11.50. John Paul Jones, $280. Thomas De Quincey, $18. Rudyard Kipling, $24. George Eliot, $23. Robert Louis Stevenson, $100. Eugene Field, $31. Alfred Tennyson, $28. Alexander Hamilton, $50. William Wordsworth, $21. Benjamin Franklin, $132.50. Andrew Johnson, $120. George Washington, $227.50. William McKinley, $67.50. John Adams, $57.50. Theodore Roosevelt, $12. Thomas Jefferson, $37.50. William Howard Taft, $55. William Henry Harrison, $24. Abraham Lincoln, $210. Zachary Taylor, $90. Mr. Madigan's interesting shop. A complete change of scene, the most fashionable shopping district of New York just around the corner of Fifth Avenue in 45th Street. A window filled with expensively framed autographs marks the sanctum of Mr. Francis P. Madigan. He is a jovial man who has all the qualities which make for the success of our Fifth Avenue art shops. He knows when to stop talking. He knows when to say the word which closes the deal. He sells to his customers. They do not buy from him. The high walls are hung with innumerable autographs in appropriate frames, signed portraits of great celebrities, some little drawings and sketches by lesser-known artists. Mr. Madigan also dabbles in art. His specialty is selling books signed by their authors. He is one of the few men who realized Oscar Wilde's importance at a time when no one paid much attention to this unfortunate poet. In the course of years he collected a mass of Oscar Wilde material, and he is now reaping the harvest. I spent an afternoon in his shop. Quite a study for the observer of human souls was the procession of visitors who came and went continuously. They pay for autographs of men who never could even sell their work during their lives. Mr. Madigan has sold more Poe material during the last 10 years than anybody else. Poor Poe! During his entire literary career, he hardly got in direct returns as much money as this dealer in dead men's letters receives for one single epistle. The Poet's Income. A letter of Poe, dated New York, January 18, 1849, also in the possession of Mr. Madigan, allows us to look behind the scenes of a literary workshop of the early 50s. It is addressed to John R. Thompson, the editor of the Southern Literary Messenger, one of the most powerful literary magazines of the time. Poe offers his services as a critic at the rate of $2 a page, provided Mr. Thompson obliges himself to take not less than 5 pages each month. The irony of fate was never better exemplified. The manuscript which he offered at $2 a page is now worth $450. The very letter in which he offers to sell it at that sum was purchased a short time ago for $500. New York, January 13, '49. My dear Sir, Accept my thanks for the 2 messengers containing Miss Tally's genius. I am glad to see that Griswold, although imperfectly, has done her justice in his late Female Poets of America. Enclosed, I send you the opening chapter of an article called Marginalia, published about 3 years ago in the Democratic Review. My object in writing you now is to propose that I continue the papers in the Messenger, running them through the year at the rate of 5 pages each month, commencing with the March number. You might afford me, as before, I presume, $2 a page. If you think well of my proposal, I will send you the 2 first numbers, 10 pages, immediately on receipt of a letter from you. You can pay me at your convenience, as the papers are published or otherwise. Very truly yours, Edgar Allan Poe. John R. Thompson, Esquire. P.S. I am about to bestir myself in the world of letters rather more busily than I have done for 3 or 4 years past, and a connection which I have established with 2 weekly papers may enable me now and then to serve you in respect to the Messenger. Our interview was interrupted by a handsome youth with a fashionable fur coat, and who used very broken English. He desired to buy autographs of French big people, and of composers and of musicians of all nations. Mr. Madigan brought out his royalty portfolios. Louis XIV and Marie Antoinette were the star pieces. The youth did not hesitate long. He bought them and took about 2 dozen letters of musical people. He ordered them all framed and sent up to his studio. He offered English banknotes in payment of the bill, some $400-odd, but Mr. Madigan insisted on receiving United States currency, and so the man went to a nearby bank, returned shortly, and paid. "What does he want with them?" I asked, astonished. The whole transaction had lasted less than 15 minutes. "He is a musician," replied Mr. Madigan, "who will play the social game. He will invite some very rich people to his studio. The walls will be hung with the autographs he has just bought, and he'll tell them about his dear relics of his ancestors, and will also point familiarly to his dear friends, the musicians and composers. If he succeeds in his game, he will keep the autographs, but most likely he will come back to me in 6 months or sooner, financially embarrassed, and will beg of me to buy them back." A well-known poet came in. Mr. Madigan took him to the back of the store. The poet wrote for a little while and then handed the sheet of paper to Madigan. A short conversation in subdued tones, and the poet left the shop. Madigan told me that the poet had written an extemporaneous ode on Oscar Wilde. "He often comes in," Mr. Madigan continued, "for a chat, and presents me quite frequently with a few lines of his poetry. Once he had not left the shop more than half an hour. I sold the poem he had just written to another friend of mine for $10. An old lady entered. She unwrapped a parcel that she had carried under her arm, a lot of letters and photographs. I felt that she resented my presence during the coming transaction. I turned my back. I listened to a long lecture by Mr. Madigan about the cheapness and undesirability of the autographs which he offered to him for sale. Finally, he offered a few dollars, and the old lady reluctantly pocketed the money and left her parcel. A young woman entered next, an interior decorator doing Mrs. Van X's breakfast room. It had come into her head that Cardinal Richelieu's picture and signature in that charming Louis XIV frame would be ideal between the lavender window hangings. She asked the price and had it sent. A newspaper man was the next visitor. He wanted a picture of Stephen Crane, the poet, to illustrate a Sunday story. Mr. Madigan fished out a portrait from many others, card-indexed and filed away in a specially constructed cabinet. And so it goes on continuously the whole day, buying and selling. Schulte's bookstore. Scattered about the throbbing city are a few quiet nooks and corners that seem especially made for the lover of antiques. They are not numerous, but full of a certain charm. Bookstores, with big boxes in front of the doors, where you can choose for your pennies tomes in old-fashioned binding and printing. Inside are shelves, laden with books in delightful disorder, left by the book hunter who looked through them before you. The narrow passageway becomes narrower on each visit you pay to the shop, because of newly arrived books and pamphlets. A long vista of books in cases well filled with a delightful miscellany of books, marks the front of Mr. Schulte's bookstore on the southwest corner of 23rd Street and Lexington Avenue. Don't cast suspicious looks at the nice girls in immaculate white blouses who loiter about the aisles. They won't interfere with you. They won't ask you any questions. You will soon feel at home after you have glanced at the titles of the books on any shelf. And if you meet Mr. Schulte, he won't be a stranger to you. There is such a deep-founded relationship between the man and his books and customers. He is the appreciative, sympathetic co-collector, and after you have gained his confidence, if the friendship is mutual, he will spread out his gems before you, a first edition with a rare imprint, or some unknown etching by Whistler, or Haydn, or Zorn. George D. Smith, speculator in literary property. A new type of bookseller has developed since books and literary property have become commercial and subject to corners created by shrewd buyers and holders and to fluctuations caused by selling en masse. Mr. George D. Smith, the king of rare books and great dealer in literary property, operates on the largest scale. Mr. Smith buys carloads of books for millions of dollars and sells again by the carload to millionaires who build palaces in California and who order their libraries complete. Mr. Smith is the leading figure in our auction houses, where he buys, excluding all competition, by paying an exorbitant price for anything he desires to possess. He is a millionaire, and the chief counselor of our nouveau riche when they furnish their homes with rare autographs and valuable books. Mr. Cadogan of Brentano's. After you have passed the stairway in Brentano's leading to the basement and properly admired the framed autographs and signed portraits which cover the walls, you will pass the gate that leads into the kingdom of Mr. Cadogan, another dealer in literary property, but of quite a different type. Mr. Cadogan is the head of Brentano's periodical department. He knows the development of the American magazine better than anybody else living. For a score of years, he has watched successes and failures, but nearest to his heart are the magazines of those men who have had the courage to stand up for their own ideas and their own conception of the world. Some of the most pathetic figures in American letters have founded magazines of their own. They would not follow the example of their contemporaries, or submit to the wishes of their publishers and to the presumed desires of the reading public. Mr. Cadogan knows them all. He recommends them if he thinks them commendable. While the gigantic trusts of our American news companies afford them very little or no chances for circulation, Mr. Cadogan adopts them and presents them for sale on his tables next to the full-fledged products of the capitalistic press. I get more satisfaction and pleasure out of Brentano's basement devoted to periodicals than out of all the periodical reading rooms of all our public libraries combined, with the Carnegie institutions thrown in. To be able to look over the current issues of magazines and to take home just the interesting ones carries with it an intimate satisfaction. Young Madigan. Everybody calls him Young Madigan to distinguish him from his father, Old Madigan, the dean of the autograph craft in the United States. Tom Madigan is young in years, about 25, but he was bred among autographs. There is a lot of romance and excitement in finding autographs. It stirred the imagination of the boy. While his schoolmates indulged in Indian stories and enthused themselves with the mysteries of Sherlock Holmes, Tom Madigan went about searching for autographs. Old country houses, dilapidated and deserted mansions, garrets even were his hunting grounds. He had a wonderful scent. He found old trunks with letters and manuscripts, boxes with documents and deeds, and his father taught him to separate the chaff from the wheat. Tom read a good deal, history and biography mostly. He became his father's walking encyclopedia. There is a good deal of the born reporter in Tom, and at a tender age he discovered his literary inclinations. His autographs furnished his material. Dead letters became alive in his hands. Magazines and journals were glad to print his rambles and discoveries. We thank him for a good many sidelights upon the private life of illustrious personages. One day Tom disappeared. The fact is, he got married and started a shop of his own. Knowledge was his only capital, and today, at the age of 25, he ranks among the first autograph dealers in America. "Yes, we have to get high prices for autographs," Madigan said smilingly, while opening his enormous safe to show me some specimens. "I believe this is, in some respects, the finest tribute the present generation pays to genius and greatness. These prices are suggestive of reflection, however, in view of the now almost universal practice of typewriting letters and manuscripts. The written word as it flows from the pen has much of the inspiration, the mental process, and the ideals of the writer. The typewritten word tells nothing." President McKinley, to give one instance, was an early user of the typewriter, and therefore manuscript letters by his hand are exceedingly scarce, scarcer and more expensive than long letters by President Adams, Jefferson, Madison, or Jackson. And I dare say that these will be far easier to procure in coming years than like specimens by Roosevelt, Taft, or Wilson. Here, look at this letter written by John Adams. Isn't it a delicious bit of intimate history that unrolls itself before our eyes? Adams, de jure leader of the Federalist Party while Alexander Hamilton has the actual power, is peeved about too much intrigue in this business, both in General Washington and me. If I shall ultimately be the dupe of it, I am much mistaken in myself. And now read this memorable line. If I could resign him the office of President, I would do it immediately and with the highest pleasure. But I never said I would hold the office and be responsible for its exercise, while he should execute it. Look at this letter by Henry Clay. Although I am not a member of any Christian church, I have a profound sense of the inappreciable value of our religion, which has increased and strengthened as I have advanced in years. Read this note of Robert Fulton's, the celebrated inventor, to his lawyer, referring to a Mr. Church, his partner, in an enterprise of small canals. By becoming a partner, he took a chance of profit or loss, but was bound to pay me the purchase money. He failed in his second payment. I consequently stayed in Europe, not regarding a man who had no regard for his engagements. Look at this distinguished handwriting of Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Can you read between the lines? I lent you by mistake a copy of my book, which contains corrections which I, therefore, need in preparing the next edition. Can you imagine the poet hunting for his corrected book, the printer waiting until he discovers that some friend has carried it away? And here is a suave note of John S. Sargent, the American portrait painter, asking some society woman, in words of utmost politeness, to come to his studio for a sitting. One almost can see the $5,000 check paid for the painting. Here, read the fuming indignation of an American poet, a letter by Bayard Taylor, whose London publishers had refused to publish his Masque of the Gods. He writes about English prudery to James R. Osgood, his American publisher. I return the 2 London letters. What prigs the publishers there must be! It is very evident they are afraid, though why, I can't see for the life of me. If there is reason for it, then you are the boldest of the bold. If you see any unusually spicy or stupid attacks, I should be greatly obliged if you would send them. Lucy Larkin is an American poetess who is not very well known, but I think this little poem, evidently never published before, is not bad. I said it in the meadow path. I say it on the mountain stairs. The best things any mortal hath are those that every mortal shares. The Romance of a Chicago Book Dealer. Wells Street, between the river and East Chicago Avenue, is the Bowery of Chicago. Once a residential section, now the old mansions and frame cottages, hastily erected after the fire, are dilapidated and are used as lodging houses and factories of the inferior sort. Here and there a modern structure, a storage house, or an industrial plant. Dan Martin's mission is here, several rescue halls, a Salvation Army citadel, the famous coffee wagons on the corners of side streets, where unfortunates are given a cup of coffee, a loaf of bread, and advice that should lead to salvation. The Moody Church is the aristocrat of the quarter. Drunken men and women line the sidewalks day and night. Gruesome phonographs are continually heard in rum shops. Policemen patrol in pairs, and this beat is considered the most dangerous in the whole city. In the midst of one of the worst blocks is a large show window. A pawnbroker would be most appropriate in these surroundings, but it is not a pawnbroker's display. There are paintings, and if you choose to step nearer to examine them, you will scarcely believe your own eyes. A couple of portraits by Benjamin West, signed. A magnificent etching by Whistler, with the familiar butterfly in the left-hand corner. High up near the ceiling, between mischievous gargoyles, a large canvas which one recognizes as a magnificent work of an Italian master. A few Dürers are pinned to the wall. Rows of old books, not dusted for a long while, are on shelves in the center. If these things are genuine, I thought, they are priceless treasures. Of course they cannot be. I entered the shop. There was just enough space to open the door, to squeeze in. Piles of books from the floor to the very high ceiling. Drawings, paintings, carvings, leaned against the dusty backgrounds of old tomes. It was the most extraordinary place I had ever entered. There seemed to be some order in this most astonishing disorder. A little bell sounded somewhere in the faraway background. It was a very long room. I heard approaching footsteps, very energetic footsteps. I was astonished that a person could worm his way through an almost invisible passage between the heaped-up stacks of volumes. An old gentleman with hair hanging to his shoulders, a long beard, wonderful eyes which seemed to sparkle in the dim light of the strange place. I liked him at once, his quiet, melodious voice, his dreaming, faraway look, and the decision of his manner. I told him frankly that the strangeness of the place, in such strange surroundings, had attracted me. I came again and again, and I treasure the hours I spent in Mr. Dorner's bookshop as among the most pleasant of my life. I never grew tired of standing up there. There was no space for a chair, and I doubt if there was a chair in the place. I think it is sacrilege to call Julius Dorner a bookseller or antique dealer. He is a collector and an antiquarian. He knows his books, and has more than 500,000 of them. He treasures his works of art, delights in showing them to you, but selling? That is another question. There is not a phase of American history he could not lecture on with more thoroughness than any American university professor. His collection of pamphlets, of the earliest newspapers and periodicals, his gift of finding important contemporary notices relating to American history in foreign journals, books, and chronicles, is remarkable. I thought him an eccentric gentleman of means, who after extensive travel round the world had decided to lead the life of a hermit among his treasures. He had, in fact, traveled very little. Collecting had been his passion from earliest youth. He had denied himself for almost 3 decades the comforts and good things of this world, and he had found a very efficient way of beating our high cost of living. It is not the high cost of living, he used to say. It is the cost of high living that troubles the world. For years I have expended 7 cents a day for my living expenses, and you can see yourself that I am strong and healthy. He is an excellent musician. Beneath thousands of pounds of books, an old-fashioned piano is buried in his shop. He called the pile of material that had to be removed before he could open the instrument his time clock. Every once in a while he would forget his work, which consisted mostly of reading and compiling, and would devote himself with all the fervor of an enthusiast to Beethoven, Bach, or Mozart. Very few customers come to his place of business. If some curiosity seeker like myself attempts to break into his sanctum, they find in him a courteous but not inviting or solicitous shopkeeper. "What do you want?" is his curt question. If a book is asked for, he will fish it out from among his 500,000 books with an almost miraculous quickness, name the price, and then it is up to the customer to say yes or no, and the interview is ended. His treasures are all finds. He discovered them in junk shops, in garrets of old mansions, in unpromising trunks of storage houses. There is, for instance, a most magnificent soft-shell cameo, a biblical scene, marvelous workmanship of some exquisite artist of the early Italian Renaissance. He bought it from a pawnbroker for $5. He refused a staggering sum from Tiffany's and resisted the very tempting price which Mrs. Potter Palmer was willing to pay for it, not because he did not need the money or was holding out for a larger profit. The sum offered him was $2,000, I believe, but because he preferred to have the cameo himself. Quite a romance. Someone who has known Mr. Durner since his first arrival in Chicago told me his story. He was a civil engineer and lost his wife and child in the same year. Grief and disappointment turned him against his profession. He inherited at this time something like 20 acres of land in Chicago, which were in those days outside the city limits, but are now the most valuable property in the city. He was waiting for a final settlement of the estate and used his idle hours looking about the bookshops in Chicago. Soon he was well known and well liked by all the book dealers. He purchased books, and his knowledge of books was astonishing. About 20 years ago, Chicago was a great center for book auctions. Shiploads of books from England were sold here, and Mr. Durner soon became a frequenter of the auction rooms. Early printed books were his hobby. Once he could not resist and put in his bid of several $100s for a rare collection. The books went to him. He could not pay, but gave as security a mortgage on his legacy. In subsequent auctions he bought large lots, increasing the mortgage upon his real estate. Then came the day when the auctioneers demanded payment. They foreclosed the mortgage, bought Mr. Durner's property at auction for a ridiculously small amount of money, at once quit the book auction business, parceled out Mr. Durner's 20 acres of land into building lots, and became millionaires. Mr. Durner bore his misfortune with equanimity. He continued his regular trips to the book dealers, and one day a proposition was put before him. A bookseller on Wells Street, one of the oldest in the city, died suddenly, and his stock of books had to be catalogued in order to be sold at public auction for the benefit of his estate. Would Mr. Durner undertake to catalogue the stock and appraise it? The estate would pay him $3 per day for his services. Mr. Durner accepted, and to make the story short, at the end of 6 months the cataloguing and appraising were not yet finished. The bookseller's heirs were unwilling to pay Mr. Durner's fees, which amounted to several $100s, upon the dubious chance of reimbursement by public auction. Would Mr. Durner accept the books themselves in payment of his claim? He would. And so he found himself the proprietor of a bookshop. Mr. Durner has made discoveries during his career which were of the utmost importance to American history. His collection of paintings, especially of American paintings, would fill a private museum. He hates commercialism. He loves weak humanity, and strange to say, the disreputable men and women of Wells Street love him, and he and his possessions are safe in the most dangerous part of the city. Or is it true, as he once answered in a rather pessimistic mood, if they suspected that I had only 1/32 carat of a diamond in my place, they would murder me and loot my shop in order to find it. But books or paintings? Who cares for them in America? Frank Morris and his famous shop. Chicago had a great literary period in the 90s. Eugene Field had come to the western metropolis and was in the early stage of his fame. Stanley Waterloo had written his books. The Whitechapel Club was in its flower. Hoppy Reed and Bill Nye carried the strangest legends of Chicago throughout the United States on their more or less romantic lecture tours. Ben King's funeral had created a sensation all over the United States. The World Fair brought a great influx of English poets and writers to Chicago. Cowley Stapleton Brown had started his unforgettable Goose Quill, in which he predicted 24 years ago that Kipling had sung his swan song in Plain Tales of the Hills, that Hall Caine would sink into oblivion after a few seasons of bestseller notoriety. He paid in the Goose Quill homage to the genius of Oscar Wilde and to the man who wrote the Elder Conklin stories. Kimball and Stone established their chapbooks, in which America was given a chance to get acquainted with Ernest Dowson, Aubrey Beardsley, John Davidson, Stéphane Mallarmé, Verlaine, Joseph Pelledin, Villiers de l'Isle-Adam. Baudelaire here found their first translations, And until today, the Chicago chapbook remains the only source of information of the lives and times of the French decadents. Bill Eaton, then, was the great dramatic critic who had his season in London and had come back as the only American who in 1 year had acquired a perfect English accent. Colonel Bill Vischer, the famous Confederate editor and singer of the Southern States, had completed his 1156th patriotic song and had issued his sentimental In the Canoe. And all this time, Frank Morris's little bookshop on West Madison Street was the center of the very select among artists and literati. Frank Morris was the friend of all of them. In his shop they used to assemble and talk of future glories and the fame of the past. Everybody loved Frank, and many were homeless after his shop had fallen victim to the flames. But soon he was established again on Adams Street. Those of his old friends who were left followed him there, and now, after times of storm, he is settled in new quarters in the Marshall Field Building. There is no more genial man to talk to than Frank. He is not only a seller of books, but is a part of the most important period of American literature, of our famous 90s. Many poets have written poems to Frank Morris. Here are two by Eugene Field. To Frank Morris. Believe me by all those endearing old charms with which your quaint shop is provided, I shall honor the trade by whose help I have made a collection of freaks that's derided. And if you believe me, when then I've to ask, that till fortune betimes readjusts me, with dollars and dimes for my yarns and my rhymes, you still shall continue to trust me. Eugene Field. October 1889. Lines written under portrait of FMM. This is the robber, as sure as you're born, against whose guile I fain would warn, the bibliomaniac, tattered and torn, who pauses to look at some second-hand book that lies on the shelf all covered with dust, and is marked $4 for cash, no trust, in a gloomy corner that smells of must, down in the shop that Morris built. Eugene Field, 1888. Powner's Bookshop. No, there is no accident, no riot, on the corner of Clark Street, opposite the City Hall. The scrambling mass of people are simply book lovers and book collectors, and Powner's has got in a new consignment of books. Such scenes occur every Saturday. The big stalls in front of the shop are filled with all sorts of books, old Roman antiquities, books on sports, old poetry collected by someone who had disposed of his books or who had left his treasures behind him. Mr. Powner used to be a school teacher in Greensburg, Indiana, and he started his book business about 12 years ago with the thoroughness of a schoolmaster. Rare and valuable books are his own special department, and he leaves modern books entirely to his clerks. His shop today is the center for the Chicago collectors. The human interest he takes in his customers is that of a real antiquarian. Everybody is at home in his shop. He doesn't begrudge anyone finding a gem on his quarter counter. Last week, for instance, some lucky chap found a first edition of Rousseau's Emile, with Rousseau's autograph presentation inscription to the king and the royal coat of arms on the binding, and bought the book for 75 cents. Such things may happen, was Mr. Powner's remark when he heard of the transaction. I am glad he got it. Saturday is the great book day. In the back room, upon empty book boxes, men of all walks of life sit around, prosperous businessmen, millionaires who are just enjoying living, students, newspaper men from the nearby newspaper offices, but they all are linked by a common love. They are all ardent book collectors. There are a good many other bookshops in Chicago. There is Hill's, who caters to the extravagant wishes of Western millionaires. Then there is McClurg's, the model bookstore conducted like a modern department store. But then there is the unique product of the Chicago book market, the peripatetic bookseller. Half collector, half merchant, these men are constantly nosing about shops, picking up books in Powner's, for instance, for 25 cents, and selling them at once for $2.50 to Mr. Hill, who they know has an inquiry for that particular copy. They love the uncertainty of their daily bread. Setting out in the morning upon their rounds, they look forward to their finds of the day. In a junk shop they, perhaps, will run across one of those scarce items which are found once in a lifetime, and again they may find nothing but worry about the needs of the day. Chicago Revisited. In Memoriam Julius Durner. Julius Durner is dead. He had been a book dealer after his own heart. Living among his books was his delight. He bought constantly, sold little, and read much, a man who valued his books by their contents. He was as simple as a girl of 16, a bad girl of 16. He wore an alpaca coat and Panama hat winter and summer, in snow and shine. Both were bought 10 years ago at a Salvation Army store. Cats were Julius Durner's only companions, stray cats picked up on dark nights in alleys and doorways. They were named after the days of the week on which he found them. He never had more than 14. Friday afternoon was a black tomcat with 6 toes on each paw. It could talk. Durner said so, and he was very truthful. He hated women who were unwomanly, thought policemen incompetent, and lived on 7 cents a day. He loved his mother, who sent him a fried chicken every Christmas, half a turkey on each Thanksgiving Day, and who brought him into this world 57 years ago. He loved her so much that he wanted to give her a gift which no money in the world could purchase, exclusive, unique. So he bought an old Washington hand press, rusty and prehistoric type, and wrote a book for her. He set it up letter by letter, word by word, line by line, page by page, distributing the type after he had made only one impression. It took him 3 years to complete his book. It took him another year to illuminate it with rare woodcuts by Dürer and Cranach, with miniatures taken from old handwritten cloister books. He bound it with his own hands, and tooled the leather of its covers with exquisite golden arabesques. His old mother in Pennsylvania could not read a word of English, though born and brought up in America. She used Pennsylvania Dutch exclusively. Julius Durner never slept in a bed, but was accustomed to sit up all night in a Morris chair in the back of his shop. His most exquisite pleasure, and only recreation, was to play Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven on an old spinet. He wore the same celluloid collar for 12 years and washed it every Monday morning with Sapolio. The same cake and collar were purchased from a starving peddler on a very cold night, as an alternative to giving the peddler 2 bits for a night's lodging. Goethe and Franz Lieber were his favorites, Whitman, Poe, and Wilde his vaudeville stage. He cooked vegetable soup in a big tin kettle each Tuesday and drank it cold for the rest of the week until the kettle was empty. He knew what was great and beautiful in art, letters, and life. To him Jesus was the greatest of men, and Rockefeller the meanest. Money was as unreal as people who buy books according to auction catalogs and bindings. He died in his Morris chair with a book on his knees. There he was found, rigid and cold, several days afterwards, by the grocer, who came to dun him for last month's bill, which amounted to $1.85. Julius Durner had a big heart, a fine mind, was a Spartan by nature, German in sentimentality, a Yankee in shrewdness, a lover of truth, an enemy of hypocrisy and idleness, a friend of outcasts. He knew books and men, and therefore could not make a success in selling books to men. Chicagoans who met him on the street saw his long hair, his alpaca coat, and his straw hat, and called him a freak. Others who had met him thought him a queer one. The chosen few to whom he gave his friendship loved him. He was 5 feet 8 inches tall, wore locks and a beard that hadn't been touched by shears for 25 years, didn't give a damn for conventions and appearances, lived his own life, subservient to no one, lording over no one. The world thought him poor. He was rich. Requiescat in pace. Croc's International Bookstore on Michigan Boulevard is to the west what Brentano's is to the east. Shopkeepers have become teachers and publicity agents. Their clients don't know what they wish to purchase. They are too tired or too ignorant to read literary reviews. They let Mr. Croc tell them what to read. Mr. Croc is an interesting little man. He wears a toupee and a broad, kindly smile. He has the demeanor of a man who has risen from the ranks and is proud of it. He has kept pace with his success. Money has not turned his head. He knows that he owes gratitude to the authors whom he sells. The quainter his find, the more exclusive seems his taste. The more he pleases his clients, the greater will be his cash receipts. And so he has an open eye for authors who are not popular. What greater boast for a book salesman in Chicago than to have disposed of more than 200 copies of Oscar Wilde's Life and Confessions by Frank Harris, to have induced more than 100 people to buy each month Pearson's magazine. And his clients are the very rich. He doesn't tire showing them the other side of life. Frank Morris is still on deck, issuing catalogs, selling rare books, delighting his many friends and clients with the charm of his personality. The man with a literary past is a most amiable companion, presuming that his heart is filled with love, and that his compassion overlooks the faults of men. Frank Morris played an important part, if not essential one, in that lurid period of the early 90s when Chicago was the literary Mecca of America. Powner's bookstore is the gathering place of book hunters and collectors. Gems can be found here, seems the unwritten motto that attracts antiquarians, as a lighted candle attracts moths. Young Mr. Powner is in the service, somewhere in France. Mr. Powner Sr. had to leave once more his ranch in Arizona and assume the responsibilities of a Chicago shopkeeper. And then there is Jansky, the old assistant of Frank Morris in his late Adams Street shop, established in a store of his own, selling books as ever, happy and contented to contribute his part toward the elevation of Chicago's literary taste. On Van Buren Street, near the boulevard, is also a new and important bookstore. Mr. Chandler, for more than 30 years of McClurg's publishing house, has set up his establishment there. Very few books are in his place, but each is a jewel. He is a sort of a George D. Smith of Chicago, but minus gambling inclinations. Books for him are not objects for speculation, but gilt-edged values. And, of course, I paid a visit to my friend George Engelke. He is a great occultist who has not eaten meat for 30 years. He believes in the powers of Hanish of lamented memory, and is a sincere follower of his cult. Engelke is like Alfred Stieglitz of 291 Fifth Avenue, New York. His soul seems to walk 3 steps ahead of his body, or 3 steps behind his body. His life is an eternally undecided race between soul and body. The Radical Bookshop is right around the corner. It is a cooperative store with a large stock of ultra-radical pamphlets and magazines, the meeting place for all sorts of Bolsheviki, pleasant Bolsheviki, who want to intoxicate themselves with words rather than with deeds, who are more eager to have a good time under present conditions than to be martyrs for a new and better world. And when they want to amuse themselves and be real radicals, they go around the block to the Dill Pickle. Mr. Johns, who is one of the cooperatives of the bookshop, is also one of the proprietors of the Dill Pickle, a sort of restaurant, public forum, dance hall, and, at present, the slum of Chicago, because some of its hangers-on were arrested as supposed bomb manufacturers during the recent IWW trial. It is a sort of debating club, a la Greenwich Village, with automobiles in front of it after 10 p.m. when the rich come to see the poor. The law-abiding want to have a peek at the lawless, the properly married to see the free lovers. Chicago is very young, you know. It is in its booties. All these new ideas are here in flower of springtime. I once said, were there no Greenwich Village, one would have to be invented. Chicago invented its own. The Dill Pickle will have many competitors soon, under the signs of flowers, vegetables, and animals. In a couple of years they will become stale canned goods, and then the empty cans will be consigned to the ash can. Greenwich Village all over again. In Boston. Bookstores are the intellectual barometers of our cities. Show me where people buy their books and I will tell you what sort of life they lead. Bookstores always were and are mirrors of the habits and intellectual preferences of men and women. The private library has ceased to be the pride of the home. Homes have given way to apartments and flats, with only little space to spare for bookshelves. The garage has taken the place of the library. We see our friends in hotels and clubs. We spend our evenings only rarely at home. Our age of electricity and rapid transportation facilities does not permit us to acquire the placid habits of book collectors and of book lovers. Sure enough, we read books because we want to know what their authors have to say. But the author remains a stranger to us. The book once read is done with forever. We speak about automobiles. We look forward to owning a machine. We are building garages with the same enthusiasm that our fathers used to expend on their libraries and their books. New York is different, but New York is not an American city. It's so near to Europe and its population so distinctly foreign that the change of the last 50 years is hardly noticeable yet in its bookshops. Detroit, the old French settlement, which only 10 years ago was a tenth of its present size, has no second-hand bookshops at all. The Detroit book dealers mete out light summer fiction, which fits into people's lunch baskets in the summer, and sentimental Christmas carols in the winter. Technical books, automobile literature are their specialties. This is only natural. 90% of the people are building motor cars in order to make a living. They are the buyers of the technical books. The minority live in order to buy cars and make motor trips, and therefore they need light fiction. The character of Albany is most truthfully portrayed in its bookstores. Our legislators have so much time on their hands that they actually read historical books, books about Dutch New York, about the wars of the Revolution, law books, old state records. It is considered good form to collect a historical library after being elected to office and residing in Albany. But curiously enough, in these same serious bookstores, loads of that sort of fiction can be found, which smut-hounds of the Vice Society are eternally trying to banish from earth. Philadelphia, of course, specializes in Quaker literature. Buffalo, infected by the spirit of Near East Aurora, is swamped with the things Elbert Hubbard used to love. Chicago discloses the peculiar love for art, literature, and philosophy that its great percentage of German workmen brought over from their fatherland and left as inheritance to the second and third generation. It is almost incredible, yet true, that laborers coming home from work in the stockyards stop at the bookstalls and buy an odd volume of Kant or Heine's Ballads and Poems. Chicago always had the finest German books in the country, most likely brought over by the immigrants. San Francisco has a touch of the East. Books on mysticism have the honor place. Curious books of all kinds are bought eagerly. Indeed, the bookstores here tell you the story of California's strange cults, of its mystics, its prophets, and its 1,001 seekers after the hidden truths of the universe. The last 10 years have brought an astonishing change in the bookstores all over the country, but nowhere a sadder and more lamentable one than in Boston, Massachusetts. Old Cornhill. This oldest street of Boston, the cheap side of New England, once an important center of city trade, gave Boston its literary charm. In the dilapidated old-time queer buildings, half a dozen bookstores invited the lovers of literature. Here was the favorite haunt of the men who gave Boston a literary reputation. It was here in Cornhill that Thomas Burnham founded the first second-hand bookshop in the United States in 1825. Young Burnham went from here day after day, with a basket of books on his arm, to the wharves to trade with seafaring people. Almost 100 years have elapsed, and the shop is still there. Oliver Wendell Holmes had his chair and desk in the Old Corner Bookshop, and in Colesworthy's was a hidden nook where Whittier used to hide for an hour or two, reading newly arrived books, but only rarely buying. Littlefield's was next door, where Lowell, Longfellow, and Emerson used to congregate, talk, and occasionally buy additions to their libraries. But alas, Boston is no more the Athens of America. The bookstores on Cornhill have shrunk to the number of 4. New buildings have invited modern business to invade the neighborhood. The remaining book dealers, still following the traditions of half a century, are very old men. Their days are counted, and soon Cornhill will be remembered as one of the landmarks that have been swept away by the modern spirit and are gone forever. Burnham's Antique Bookstore. Richard C. Lichtenstein, 55 years ago an apprentice to old Mr. Burnham, is now the proprietor of the shop. He has many memories of great book days in Boston. The most interesting of all my finds since I entered the second-hand book trade in the late 60s, he said, he's a good and entertaining talker, was the copy of Poe's Tamerlane, which created a great sensation among collectors. This small pamphlet of 40 pages, published by Colin F. Thomas in Boston in 1827, had escaped the searches of the keenest of book collectors. I usually spent my noon hour in other second-hand stores, and one day I found this small pamphlet which I purchased for 25 cents. I had a good many opportunities to dispose of it, but didn't sell it before 1892, in auction. It was knocked down to Dodd Mead and Company for $1,850. Tamerlane has remained unique among all the books, being today the mostly American book known. I understand a New York bookseller is holding a copy at $15,000. One day, I was offered a small volume which lacked the title and 2 leaves. There was nothing specially attractive about the book, but the same intuition for which I never could account and that guided me through my whole life as a bookseller urged me to offer the owner $2, which was readily accepted. Later, I found out that the book was a copy of the Bay Psalm book, the first book printed in New England, Cambridge, 1640. Bishop Hurst bought the book for $1,000, and after his death it fetched $2,500 in the auction of his library. But I have also met with great disappointments. The greatest one was on a visit to an old Boston family residing on Beacon Hill. An elderly lady, the only surviving member of this family, wished to dispose of her library, and I found her seated between 2 piles of books, busily engaged in tearing out the fly-leaves wherever they contained any inscriptions. Nothing could induce her to stop this barbaric atrocity. I begged of her to let me examine the fly-leaves and titles before she threw them in the open grate. I saw, to my grief, John Hancock's inscriptions and George Washington's presentation to some lady contemporary, revolutionary persons of the first importance. Another opportunity I missed was years ago when Mr. James J. Blaine happened to drop in our shop, selecting a copy of Count Gramont's memoirs, asking to have the volume laid aside for him. He wrote his name on the title page, and was to call and pay for it on his return to the hotel. The incident must have slipped his memory, for he never returned for the book, and I was foolish enough to erase his signature from the flyleaf. Especially in our days, where association books were so very much in demand, Blaine's name in the memoirs would have been a sought-after curiosity. Laureates. A sort of Brentanos in Boston, the gathering place of society, of students and of scholars. They carry everything from the rarest book to some new Parisian magazine whose first number appeared 4 weeks ago. Mr. Weber, the head of the firm, looks like Napoleon III, and has the most splendid contempt for everything new in book lore. Mr. Braithwaite was in his shop during my visit, and it was astonishing to hear the anthologist of 6 volumes of new poetry talking a sensible everyday language. A new and evil spirit. Boylston Street faces the big park, is a lively promenade. A good deal of shopping is done in its neighborhood, a street always densely populated. The garden side bookshop hung out its shingle here, which consists of a huge garden gate. Women have a good deal to do in public life in Boston, and women are determined to be the intellectual guides of Boston book buyers, at least of such as wish to be modern and up-to-date. The garden side bookshop is conducted by women exclusively. I dare say women must also be the chief buyers. The most marvelous and costly bindings on rows and rows of shelves, books of poetry, novels, anthologies that were never heard of, and what is still worse, will never be heard of, are beautifully dressed like brainless women who wear gowns of Worth or Lady Duff Gordon. Mrs. Bertha Beckford, one of the proprietors, approached me with the charm of the reception lady in a fashionable hairdressing establishment, and invited me to inspect some darling little books, the sweetest ever, just arrived from Paris. I followed her to a little salon done in pink and canary, and viewed little miniature books bound in French crepe, a wallpaper effect. There were French anthologies of bits of poetry and of war sentiment. Dowagers with grown-up granddaughters and studded lorgnettes went into fits of ecstasy over the darling books, and I shouldn't be surprised if they bought some and took them, as much-appreciated gifts, to some home for convalescent soldiers and sailors. Bookshops for boys and girls. Splendid, I thought, seeing the sign next door. The shop where boys and girls can come and choose their reading. It's located on the 4th floor of the Women's Educational and Industrial Union. It looks like a pharmacy. There wasn't a boy or girl in sight. A few old ladies who must have left the sewing circle on the 3rd floor were sitting about reading. I looked around the shelves, and I wondered if all the Boston boys and girls lacked red blood and the gift of fancy, and actually read the books I saw. Miss Alma Howard, one of the dispensers of this shop, told me that all books are being carefully censored and selected by one Bertha E. Mahoney, the director of the bookshop of the Union. Bertha seemed to be the ruling spirit. She has forbidden such and such books. She has placed others on the blacklist. But she also selected books that ought to be read by boys and girls. I asked what literary qualifications Miss Mahoney had to qualify her for the censoring. All I could gather was the fact that Miss Mahoney is Miss Mahoney, a whilom superintendent of the food shops of the Union on the floor below. Needless to say, the Union is a highly aristocratic place, frequented exclusively by the flower of Boston's ultra-fashionables. Why doesn't someone start a real bookstore for boys and girls, accessible to everyone, where second-hand books could be had for 10 cents or a quarter? Every other old building in Boston, and many churches, bear honor tablets telling us that here assembled revolutionists of 1776. The Boston of today, with all its laws of restriction and of censorship, is proud of its ancient rebels. How paradoxical! In talking about laws, a new one has just been enacted. The police apply to the sale of second-hand books the same rule as to the sale and buying of second-hand clothing. A dealer, purchasing books from anyone, has to report the purchase to the police, describe the article purchased, and has to wait 30 days before he can sell it. The law requires that each book dealer must pay $5 for a license. A similar law had been enacted 60 years ago as a Civil War protective measure. Oh, Athens of America! Selling books with a second-hand clothes dealer's license. Books in icebox. Opposite the Copley Plaza, in a fashionable little building of its own, is the Dorado of America's rejected poets and poetesses, essayists, novelists, free verse artists, and of everybody else Amy Lowell and Ezra Pound would press to their bosom. Here is the bookshop of the 4 Seas Publishing Company, and never was there a greater collection of literary atrocities in one room than in this airy, inviting Hall of Fame. The soul of Amy Lowell greets one uncannily articulate from the page of each book. A very ambitious clerk praised the authors of the books higher than genius has ever been praised in America. We have bought 81 titles from the Badger Publishing Company only recently and have not spared any expense to print the most attractive title and jackets for this new addition to our stock. Everybody knows the Badger books. The Badger Publishing Company gladly accommodates authors of novels and extends to them the privileges of their printing establishment, provided they are willing to pay for publication. I descended to the basement to see the enormous stock of books the 4 Seas Company had acquired. The store must have been occupied by a wholesale florist previously, and the most tremendous icebox I ever saw in my life filled the whole basement. The Badger books, thousands of them, were neatly piled up in the icebox. They were in the proper place indeed. The Mysterious Bookshop. On Washington Street is a very attractive bookstore conducted by a blind couple, man and wife about 30 years of age, both totally blind. The shop is scrupulously clean. If you ask for a book, the proprietor will find it in a miraculous way, provided it is on the shelves. If you are browsing about, picking up a book here or there, he will ask you to read off to him the title, and then tell you the price. Both look happy, contented, and seem prosperous. I wondered how it had happened that they started in the book business, that both of them were blind. Had they been blind before they married, or had misfortune overtaken them after their marriage? They're in a strange and mysterious place, but peaceful and harmonious. 1918. Small-town stuff. What is the mysterious power directing the fates of small-town inhabitants? Who is it who sells them the same style of clothes, induces them to furnish their homes so that they resemble one the other like one egg resembles another egg? Who is it who makes the people talk and think alike, never permitting an individual thought, or an expression of individual opinion? Everything and everybody seem to be cut after the same pattern. Unessentials are the important things in their lives, and they miss the joy of living. They have not learned to be their real selves. They have not been given a chance. Someone told me once, "America is a young nation. We are about 100 years behind Europe. Our people have not developed yet the sense for beauty and art." It is not so. America of the 50s of the last century knew the best in life, letters, and art. But with the first great fortunes made during the early railroad boom, some mysterious powers perverted the minds of America systematically, created in them the lust for sensation, for things of the minute, and today people are being fed with theaters, and newspapers, and libraries, and music, and styles that they really do not want. They are not given a chance. They must take what these mysterious powers somewhere on Wall Street think good for them, or they can stay at home, lose prestige among their fellow townsmen, suffer in business, and be decried ultimately as Bolsheviks or Reds. A few weeks in Milwaukee, or any other town of its size, will open your eyes. Milwaukee has grown incredibly since 1914, produced several hundreds of war millionaires, and has the aspects of a most thriving, prosperous city. The people crave for good entertainment, good reading, a glimpse of art. There is an art institute heavily subsidized by the city. Its permanent exhibition is not worthwhile talking of. Any third-rate dealer in New York can produce such masterpieces from his stockroom. They are hung on the staircases and kept in boxes in the cellar of this art institute. The traveling exhibitions are displayed on walls that need cleaning. There is not the atmosphere of appreciation in this building. The main space is occupied by a sort of rummage exhibit consisting of all sorts of souvenirs lent by Milwaukeeans who became members of the Institute. Articles that can be purchased often in 10-cent stores are here on exhibition with a card of the proprietor. The Leighton Gallery next door is a noble opposite to the Art Institute, bequeathed to the city by the late Leighton, millionaire packer. His hobby during his lifetime, it is a real temple of art. In an imposing, purely Greek structure, wonderful masterpieces collected from all over the globe, almost every known name well represented. Its curator, Mr. George Robb, an artist of fame himself, has never permitted commercialism or provincial small tradesman ambition to enter into his sanctuary. Mr. Robb, who himself selected the greater part of the collection, has the rare sense of the antiquarian. His lectures have aroused a good deal of comment and, incidentally, interest for his gallery. He wishes to make the artist live again in his work. He has given up hope to convert the present generation. His hope is the coming generation. In children and students, he tries to arouse a love of beauty and sense of harmony and color. There is only one bookstore in the real sense of the word in Milwaukee, DeForge's. Its owner is a bookman of the old type, knows values and authors, has studied his profession in England and France, and caters to the collectors and lovers of the printed word. The young people don't care for books, he told me. They do not wish to accumulate libraries. The women folk come in and ask for something nice to read and take my word for it. And on occasion they buy nicely bound books for gift purposes. Again here, the mysterious powers behind the throne. The books that are featured in movie theaters, in installment novels, and in daily papers are the best sellers. The New Era shop that had recently unpleasant introductions to the police department endeavors to sell radical literature only. Its proprietors are young and therefore hopeful. They may gain in the course of years knowledge of books and then select the right sort of stock. It is not radical to lend out George Moore's A Storyteller's Holiday for $5 for a reading, because, well, radical does not mean immoral or lascivious. The New Era shop could inaugurate a new era for Milwaukee book readers if its proprietors would inform themselves about the sort of books worthwhile introducing to the public. But even to this shop, thanks are due. It may lead to something bigger and better. The department stores advertise their book departments extensively. Here is the great hunting ground for the Chambers and Chesters and Nick Carters and psalm and hymn books. Rosaries are also carried in these book departments. The public is not given a chance. David Graham Phillips and Susan Lennox have just reached Milwaukee, and everybody is excitedly discussing the fall and rise of Susan. Several societies for the uplift of poor working girls have been organized as the direct result of the book. The theater buildings are magnificent, modern, airy buildings with comfortable seats and all new improvements that make the sojourn in a show house delightful. But the moving pictures shown are again on the level of newspaper fiction stories, of church sermons, and of best-selling novels. The millionaire, who is a villain and becomes an honest working man. The poor woman who marries a millionaire, despite his upstart mother's protests. The cowboy who cleans up a mining camp and kills a dozen rowdies in order to sink exhausted in the arms of his boyhood sweetheart, whom he had deserted years ago. And men, women, and children sit through all this. To have dinners by the light of orange-colored candles while sitting on the floor or on the pillows gracefully grouped about an anemic poet who reads ephemeral, languid stanzas belongs to the good taste required in the best circles of Milwaukee. Smocks and bobbed hair have just made their appearance, and an art magazine will soon add the final touches of aestheticism. Small gift shops have been opened by enterprising dealers from Chicago, and there will be food for amusement for years in Milwaukee. But who will come to this one and to hundreds of other towns and give these good, helpless people what they want? Good books, good plays, good movies, and a chance to express their individualities in a healthy, pleasant way? 1919. New York book magnates. If I were rich, said a well-to-do broker to me recently, I'd spend a few hours every day in one of those book dens on Fifth Avenue. Their proprietors are delightful people. The surroundings are as comfortable as a club library. Only it is so intimate there, and they always seem to have the very things that one wants. And they are so darned expensive. They seem to be in touch with the whole world, and the mere fact that they always have new things whenever I drop in is sufficient proof that the genus of bookworms is not on the dying-out list, and that people buy costly books, even in our times of so many other lures. Of course, there are book buyers today who expend thousands and thousands of dollars for rare books, but whom we would not class with the enthusiastic broker who wished to be rich in order to be able to follow his hobby. Rich men often buy their books as investments. They have their brokers who attend auctions for them. And one day we read that Mr. So-and-so bought such and such a book for a staggering sum of money, and 6 months later we receive a catalog from an auction house telling us that the very same book lover will dispose of duplicates from his library at auction. And lo, we find the very same much-advertised rare book in this catalog. If we compare the price he receives with the price he paid several months ago, we will invariably understand why a stock gambler was induced to become a book lover. But, as I said, we still have antiquarians of the old school with us, and we also have booksellers who have preserved Ben Jonson's spirit in the Book Dealers Guild. Gabriel Wells. It is not so very long ago that Mr. Wells did not occupy his palatial suite on Fifth Avenue, and the enthusiasm he then had for his books and for their authors is his today. Fine sets of well-known authors and also of the minor lights are his specialties. Printed on beautiful papers, wonderfully bound, marvelously extra-illustrated, inscribed by their authors, they are there on his shelves. They seem alive. They seem to talk to you. They seem to smile to you a welcome. If Mr. Wells feels you a friend, a brother lover of books, the whole world knows about Mr. Wells' beautiful sets of books, and whoever wants a rare, unusual edition comes to Mr. Wells, or writes to him, or wires to him, or cables to him, dealers as well as private buyers. And if he has time, he may ask you to view the original manuscript of Robert Louis Stevenson's New Arabian Nights, or of Victor Hugo's 93, or he will show you a bundle of letters written by Thomas Paine, the draft of a speech in Lincoln's own hand. He could fill a museum with the material wrapped up in his safe. And the most delightful thing is the free air of hospitality in his den. I don't know another place where one can lounge around more comfortably. And not to forget his assistant, Mr. Royce, the Balzac enthusiast, who compiled the only Balzac bibliography in existence. Mr. Drake. Opposite the library, in a white stucco house with a narrow stairway and Gothic arched windows, is the sanctum of Mr. James F. Drake. He is a jovial old gentleman who knows more about the first editions of English and American authors than any other book dealer. It is his pride to be the first in New York to specialize in first editions, and he is as well known in London as on this side of the ocean. First editions inscribed by the authors line the bookcases along the walls, and rare prints and pamphlets nod and invite you behind their shining glass cases. Mitchell Kennerly. Someday, I hope in the near future, someone will write a true appreciation of Mitchell Kennerly, the great pathfinder in the American publishing field. He has done more for us here than any other English book dealer ever anywhere, with the exception perhaps of Heinemann in London. In America, Mitchell Kennerly remains unique. Endless is the list of English and American authors he introduced to his readers for the first time. We know, for instance, that Dutton sold in 1 month the complete first edition of Leonard Merrick's collected works, and thousands of copies of his books since. But Mitchell Kennerly introduced him to us 12 years ago when no one knew his name. Or Hergesheimer, a bestseller ever since the Saturday Evening Post placed him among its regular contributors. But Mitchell Kennerly published his bestseller of today many years ago. He gave us the tragic poets Middleton and Davidson, and no one has printed them since. The first part of his catalog is a roll of honor of the English 90s. He always kept a sharp eye for American contemporary authors, and usually got the best of the work they had done and, I am sorry to say, ever will do. There is Harry Kemp, for instance. He didn't beat his first book yet, published by Kennerly a half-dozen years ago. Horace Traubel found his life's dream materialized when Mitchell Kennerly published his diaries with Walt Whitman in Camden. Not to forget Alexander Harvey's masterful short stories. One of them, The Toe, is worth a whole bookshelf of short stories. And dear Michael Monaghan, whose charming books he published, whose magazine, The Papyrus, he gave a temporary home. Mitchell Kennerly also claims the honor of having introduced Frank Harris to America. Possessor of 60,000 original drawings. A new type of bookseller has developed during the last 25 years, a man who combines part of the knowledge of the antiquarian of yore with the qualities the modern collector and book buyer will request from his agent. Books and literary property have become commercial values equal to stocks which are listed upon the stock exchange, subject to corners created by shrewd buyers and holders, to fluctuations caused by selling en masse. The successful rare book dealer of today must operate with his wares like a stockbroker. The banker who starts his business with a limited capital and operates on a legal interest basis has very little chance to become rich. But if he succeeds in acquiring with his limited capital the entire stock of a mine which proves a success after he acquired it, has equal chances to make money as the rare book dealer who has had the good fortune to buy for a farthing the entire literary property of a man who proves a celebrity after his death, and whose manuscripts are worth 100 times their weight in gold. Harry Stone is a book dealer of the new type. He acquired his knowledge here and there. The desire to wander from his earliest youth made him pass the entrance exam into the University of Hard Knocks. He always loved books. He was always buying books. Eagerly he absorbed books on books, articles about books and authors, and auction prices current. After he had acquired a collection of curious books, which would fill the shelves of a good-sized store, he started his shop on 4th Avenue, that avenue that once led to the Astor Library, and that was lined with bookshops on both sides. He not only appreciated the commercial value of books, but he read them, especially those that were scarce and more valued than other works by the same authors. And he learned to respect the men who wrote these books. His shop became the gathering place of literature. Wrecked hopes of authors and publishers found in Stone's shop a safe harbor. He paid a fair price for everything of value offered him, and soon he was known as the dealer in quaint and curious books and pamphlets. Good fortune knocked on his door. One rich find came after another. He was able to supply collectors and other book dealers with long-sought-after items. Recently, he acquired the most complete collection of American drawings by magazine illustrators that was ever gathered under one roof. 60,000 specimens of American and foreign artists whose works have appeared in American illustrated magazines he bought from the files of leading publishers. In an astonishingly short time, he made himself acquainted with his new field. He became a walking encyclopedia of American illustrators. He searched libraries and other resources for biographical data of lesser-known artists whose works are included in his collection. He studied the different periods of art development in America, and again he made his shop not only the gathering place of his customers, but an interesting meeting place of artists and of connoisseurs. He is very young, not 30 yet, a bright young fellow with a keen sense of appreciation, because he knows that only the good will stand the proof of time and will last and will eventually become a good investment. He knows the borderline between artist and businessman. He never transgresses into foreign territory, and therefore one can call him justly an idealist at times when he talks about art. President Harding's favorite book. President-elect Harding was and is a newspaper man. Thank God for that. He knows life as it is and as it appears to be in the press. The man who knows how to read our newspapers has won half of the battle, and newspaper men are generous and excellent judges of men. Harding smokes cigarettes. This puts him in a different class. Look out for the man who warns you against cigarettes, who tells you on offering him your case, with a superior smile, "Thanks, I don't use them." Sometimes I will sing a song of hate against those black cigars of the sedate and of the respectable. I loathe the cigar of the habitual smoker, so justly characterized by Schopenhauer as a stimulant of thought for people who do not think. Not one smoker of cigarettes ever arrives at that low level of enjoyment. To smoke a cigar is not much more than a hobby. The cigarette is a passion, a vice. The cigarette is intoxicating. If one inhales the aromatic smoke, draws it deep into one's lungs, into blood and nerves, one feels that this narcotic wonder poison liberates the soul from a profane pressure, and one's spirit is lured to lighter and brighter regions. Intoxication is the sweet magic of the cigarette, and, therefore, the cigarette is inseparable from all extravagant enjoyments. The cigarette is in the gambling den. It can be found always where they drink champagne. It is a part of frivolity, of sin, of the poetry of enjoyment. Its aromatic fragrance, the tender rings that vanish swiftly into grotesque figures, the cigarette is the perfume of the boudoir. The cigarette smoker never looks for a stronger brand as the consumer of cigars who methodically tans his tongue with his weed. The cigarette smoker increases his daily ration and finally smokes between the courses of his meal, between his kisses. In the green room of theater and concert room, you can see him hungrily reaching for his silver case, the gift of his beloved. He awakens in the night and lights his cigarette. And what peace and joy after each long draught of the sweet redeeming bewilderment. That's quite different from that brown, ill-smelling butt, chewed from one corner of the mouth to the other, lighted again and again, until it has happily dissolved itself into ashes. A bedroom filled with smoke. A long story of enlightenment to the one who knows. The cigarette fits in our nervous times, a nervous pleasure for a nervous people. We smoke cigarettes because we are nervous. We are nervous because we smoke cigarettes. How beautiful they look, golden tender threads enclosed in fragile rice paper, like a lovely woman's beautiful hair, fragrant and tempting. Compare them with the most beautiful box of cigars, those black, strong-smelling cigars, carcasses of leaves transformed into mummies. Think of the men who smoke them, and tell me, isn't there some similarity? In some Sunday paper I read that Mr. Harding's favorite book was written by Edgar Saltus. You rack your brains? You don't remember Saltus? 20 years ago, he was hailed as the coming American novelist. At least 20 books of his appeared in short succession. Today he is known almost exclusively to the book lover. First, often the only editions of some of his books are in demand and sell at fancy prices, while others can be found at the book bargain counters of Liggett's drugstores at 25 cents a copy. His Magdalene appeared at the time of Oscar Wilde's visit to America. Both men met here, in London and Paris. Critics contend that Wilde received from this book his inspiration for Salome. There are pages and pages of great similarity in both books. Saltus's Magdalene is a fine contribution to the world's literature of Magdalenes. In all his books, there is a touch of the French 80s and a resonance with the English 90s. If Saltus had not been a scholar, he would be another George Moore. Only a connoisseur can take a fancy to Saltus, a man who has a fine sense for literature and for life. I love to think of the newspaper man with literary inclinations smoking his cigarette while reading one of Saltus's books in his study in the White House. 1920.